I'm calling to order this hearing. This is a public hearing of the Committee of the Whole of the Council of the District of Columbia. I'm Phil Mendelson, Chairman of the Council and Chair of the Committee of the Whole. Today is Wednesday, February 21st, 2024. The time is 2:08 in the afternoon. This hearing is being held in room 412 of the John A. Wilson Building. Although a number of the witnesses will be participating virtually, which always makes it a little bit of a challenge for me. The subject of today's hearing is agency performance oversight with regard to the following four entities or agencies: the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, the Office of Budget and Planning, the District of Columbia Auditor, and the New Columbia Statehood Commission. And we'll be hearing testimony in that order. This is the first of 6 oversight hearings that the Committee of the Whole is having this season. Tomorrow we'll be having a hearing on Office of Zoning, Office of Planning, Department of Buildings, and the Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority. Next week will be education agencies starting on Tuesday. The complete schedule is available on the council's website, www.dccouncil.gov. It's not clear to me whether hearing notices have indicated that members of the public who wish to testify may sign up by going to the council's website. Again, www.dccouncil.gov. And there, one would click on the hearing management system, which might be called HMS. Members of the public who are not testifying at a hearing are still encouraged to provide written statements if they wish. Again, going to the hearing management system, which would be the council's website or lims.dccouncil.gov/hearings. And members of the public may, but not agency representatives, may testify by leaving voicemail. We don't provide that option to agency directors. Voicemail by calling 430-6948. Testimony in that way is limited to 3 minutes and is transcribed through some technology that exists. So the first part of this hearing will be Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments. We have an ANC commissioner. Is she here? ANC Commissioner Santiago Lacatos from ANC 1B04, and then I'll ask the executive director to come forward. Commissioner?
Good afternoon, Chairman Mendelson. Am I good to start?
I can hear you.
All right. Good afternoon, Chairman Mendelson. My name is Santiago Lactos. I'm an ANC commissioner representing Single Member District 1B04 in the U Street Corridor. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I will also note I submitted my testimony for the record this morning. I'm here to testify about one specific thing: the need for the COG to work with DDOT and DMWA to make sure the district has access to a federal grant program for safe road infrastructure. As you know, Mr. Chairman, we have a crisis of traffic violence on our streets with 52 deaths and over 6,000 people injured last year, the most in 16 years since 2007, by virtue of revenue, borrowing, funding allocations, and a variety of other challenges. We just don't have enough money in the budget to address this crisis on our own using local dollars for road safety improvements. But there is actually a federal program specifically designed to allow us to do so, but we can't access it. I'm going to be honest, the next part, we're getting a bit into the weeds, but bear with me because I'm going to try and lay out the way the COG can do some work to help the district access that program. For context, the program, which is called Safe Streets and Roads for All, also known as SS4A, is a multi-billion-dollar program created by Congress in the bipartisan infrastructure law to provide funding for cities to design and implement projects for safer streets. We have so many of these proposed projects or hypothetical projects across the district languishing because we don't have enough capital money because of that strained budget. We could really use those federal dollars to get it done. Unfortunately, as is a challenge due to our lack of statehood and representation, language in the law unintentionally excludes DDOT from applying because it is considered a state Department of Transportation and does not factor in the unique nature of us being a city as well. While the US DOT staff have expressed a strong desire to help DDOT access the program, they are restricted by the law, and unfortunately, the way Congress is looking now, it doesn't seem like the law is going to change anytime soon, and we should really wait around for it. This is where the COG comes into play. While DDOT can't apply directly, metropolitan planning organizations such as the COG are able to apply for projects in the district in coordination and on DDOT's behalf. That being said, in order for DC to access that pot of money, the COG needs to do some work. Specifically, the COG needs to create a statutorily compliant, comprehensive safety action plan with projects in it in order to apply for the implementation funds to build the projects. If the COG needs money to hire a consultant to make a plan, there's actually a massive amount of leftover money each round in SS4A for planning grants that they could use to pay for it. It's a very undersubscribed area, and they would most certainly receive the funds. To be clear, this is not something that's a long-range transportation plan, or we can wait a long time to complete it. It needs to meet the statutory requirements that USDOT has. Just this morning, actually, coincidentally, USDOT released its notice of funding opportunity for this year's round of SS4A funding, with applications for different segments of the program due between April and August. Last week, Councilmember Allen noted that there have been conversations around potentially applying through COG, no actual applications. What we need to know is if the COG is going to apply for a grant to make that action plan, and then follow up afterward when they receive it to work with DDOT to maximize access to those implementation funds. To summarize, we have a large pot of federal funds for safe street infrastructure we don't have access to due to legislative errors and lack of statehood. USDOT will quite literally pay for the cost of the COG to make a plan so that they can access the funds. The district already has a plan with a lot of projects ready for if the COG needs help figuring out which ones to include. And once that plan is made, the COG needs to work with DDOT to apply for those implementation grants to build the projects. I would ask that you ask Director Mercer some of the following. Will the COG be applying for a planning grant in this upcoming round of funding for SS4A? Or is the COG already in the process of creating a statutorily compliant comprehensive safety action plan? If so, what is the status, and will they be applying for implementation grants for this round? What is the COG currently doing to collaborate with DDOT on accessing those funds? When was the last time their staff met with DDOT? How frequently do they meet to discuss this funding source? I recognize there's a lot of very niche kind of specifics, but I think this is a really impactful area that we can really build on with my collaboration with the COG. Thanks for the opportunity to testify, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Commissioner. I don't think I have any questions, although maybe I'll ask this one, and that is, have you raised this with staff at the Council of Governments?
No, but my understanding is that DDOT has extensively, and so is DeMaw, and I believe Councilmember Allen has as well, but I don't know what the status is of those.
Okay. I don't have any other questions. Thank you for bringing this to our attention.
Thank you.
Let me turn to the Executive Director, Mr. Mercer. Good afternoon. Were you here last year?
I was virtual last year, so it's my second time up.
Second time.
First
up.
time in person.
When you're ready.
Would you like me to respond to the comment first or go into my
Go
prepared
into the
remarks?
testimony and then respond to
Testimony?
the
Yes,
comment.
sir. Okay. Well, good afternoon, Chairman Mendelson, council members. I'm Clark Mercer, the Executive Director of the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, also known as COG. And today I'm pleased to discuss the role of COG in moving the region forward during the last year and our goals for the upcoming year. As most of you know, COG's membership is made up of the region's local and state elected officials. We represent 24 local governments, including the District of Columbia and jurisdictions in Northern Virginia and suburban Maryland, totaling over 6 million residents. Our elected officials and local government staff serve on a network of boards, policy committees, and partnerships to provide input and policy directions on regional policies and plans. COG's three major boards are the COG Board of Directors, the National Capital Regional Transportation Planning Board, known as TPB, and the Metropolitan Washington Air Quality Committee, known as MWAC. Our policies and advisory committees include the Climate, Energy, and Environment Committee, Chesapeake Bay and Water Resources, Human Services, Region Forward Coalition, and the Food and Agriculture Committee. We support a multitude of public-private partnership groups, including Commuter Connections and Clean Air Partners. And over the course of a month, we convene many professional and technical committees including many of your agency heads, including local officials such as our chief administrative officers, planning directors, budget directors, chiefs of police, housing directors, and our region's chief equity officers. In fiscal year 2023, the District of Columbia paid approximately $1 million for COG membership dues, Regional Public Safety Fund, Regional Environmental Fund, the Regional Farm Fund, and DC share for the Climate Air Partners and Anacostia Watershed Restoration Program. The district paid an additional $1 million to participate in other regional programs, including Street Smart campaigns for pedestrian and roadway safety, and regional public safety projects, including automated fingerprint identification system, geospatial data exchange, the regional license plate reader program, and identify and access management systems that enable our public safety agencies to work together across state lines, known as the Mutual Aid Agreement. The district also paid COG approximately $13 million in federal funding dollars that passes through to COG to administer programs in federally designated transportation planning and regional transportation programs, the Homeland Security Executive Committee in support of regional Homeland Security projects, and stream restoration monitoring. Including these federal pass-throughs, the payments in FY23 totaled approximately $15 million. I'm going to go over just a few of our priorities for the coming year, and then obviously happy to answer the commissioner's point and any questions you might have. Number one, addressing the region's housing needs. In 2019, the COG Board of Directors concluded a year-long effort with local planning and housing directors to address the region's housing needs by adopting regional housing targets. The three targets called for 75,000 additional housing units by 2030, beyond the 245,000 units already anticipated. Of these 75,000 additional units, the target is to put 75% of the units in activity centers or high-capacity transit station areas, 75% of the units deemed affordable to low and middle-income household. And over the last few years, we have collaborated closely with the District of Columbia and 7 local jurisdictions in Maryland and Virginia to help them meet fair housing requirements through development of the Regional Fair Housing Plan, also known as the Regional Housing Equity Plan. This marks the first time in nearly 3 decades that local jurisdictions in this region have joined together to create a joint plan for metropolitan Washington. To further support the work of the Regional Fair Housing Plan, COG has applied for federal funding through the Pathways to Removing Obstacles to Housing, known as PRO Housing, to identify and remove barriers to affordable housing production and preservations. Grantees may use the awards to further develop, evaluate, and implement housing policy plans, improve housing strategies, and facilitate affordable housing production and preservation. This is a unique opportunity that could be instrumental in creating more affordable housing in the region. And in 2024, COG will administer the 3rd round of the Housing Affordability Planning Program, HAP funds, which support housing planning initiatives and projects to increase the amount of affordable housing near transit. Second priority area is combating climate change. COG staff works with the regional climate goal outlined in Metro Washington 2030 Climate and Energy Action Plan, which calls for a 50% reduction in GHG emissions below the 2005 baseline emission levels. Transitioning towards zero emission vehicles and building out the regional electric vehicle EV infrastructure network are key GHG mitigation strategies identified in this plan. The board recognizes the need for increased collaboration to support EV plans, programs, and policies as necessary to meet the regional climate goals. In 2023, the COG board established a regional electric vehicle deployment working group to serve as a forum for members to collaborate and coordinate action. 2, called for the development of an EV deployment clearinghouse. And in 2024, so that's on the EV side. And in 2024, COG will focus on supporting the board's new regional solar energy goals, including 1, deployment of 250,000 solar rooftops by 2030, 2, supporting members to install solar on government facilities, including public schools, government buildings, and carports, 3, urging all COG members to explore procuring 100% of electricity for government operations with renewable energy, and 4, encourage all members to support community-wide efforts to deploy solar through programs for low-income residents, effective industry engagement, efficient zoning and permitting, provision of incentives, rebates, and grants, support for bulk purchasing and solar co-ops, and community choice aggregation and workforce development. Third area of emphasis is advancing racial equity. Racial equity is a fundamental COG value, which has been affirmed by the board of directors in a resolution approved in July of 2020. The board affirms that COG's work will be anti-racist, will advance equity, and that equity will be woven into COG's vision, programs, and priorities. COG established the Chief Equity Officers Committee, which is comprised of the Chief Equity Officer or an equity lead from each of our 24 jurisdictions, and we meet monthly, serving as the hub for advancing these initiatives throughout the region, within COG's member local governments, and through COG's work. We will continue to support the committee and our member jurisdictions in advancing equity within their local government policies and practices. We've been doing this and we will continue though, but in 2024, we will be hosting a series of trainings focused on teaching local government practitioners how to incorporate equity into comprehensive plans in zoning and planning. Fourth area of emphasis is protecting the region's air and water. We will continue to coordinate regional planning and policy related to improving the region's air quality, as well as protecting its waterways. Actions at the federal, state, and local levels to reduce air pollutants over the past 20 years have led to a significant decrease in unhealthy air days from 64 in 2001 to 8 in 2021 to only 3 in 2022. However, due to the Canadian wildfires in 2023, our region experienced 20 unhealthy air days last year. Last year's increase in unhealthy air days shows that, despite vast improvements to air quality in the region, there's still much more that can be done to increase our resilience to extreme weather and ensure a safe and healthy environment in our communities. We will continue to lead efforts to coordinate air quality planning, pollution monitoring, and communication on air quality events for the region. Area wastewater treatment plants, including the Blue Plains Advanced Wastewater Treatment Plant in the District of Columbia, now achieve some of the highest standards anywhere in the United States. The District of Columbia is among the region's leaders with its Clean Rivers Project, Stormwater Credit Trading Program, and Green Infrastructure Solutions. COG is working with water utilities and other partners in the region to obtain funding for a proposed U.S. Army Corps of Engineers study on the regional's water supply, including the identification of a secondary water source and additional water storage capacity for the Metro Washington region. And last but not least, Metro funding. We are doing an awful lot at COG to ensure the financial stability of the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority, known as WMATA. In 2023, we convened all of the chief administrative officers from the region to work with WMATA staff and the district's chief financial officer to conduct a thorough review of WMATA's cost structure to be independently analyze and verify the magnitude of the system's budget deficit, identify ways to optimize the funding needed for FY25, and to identify actions to provide stability and predictability for WMATA's operating costs into the future. The CAO work group on cost structure released an interim report in December 2023, making a number of recommendations to address the short-term funding deficit and overall financial stability of Metro. So in 2024, we will continue to work with our local, state, and federal officials to pass the necessary legislation to allocate funding, operating funds to address Metro's short-term operating funding deficit in FY25 and 26. A bigger issue and more long-term issue, which we need to address and we will address in 24, is collaborating with WMATA, local, state, and federal officials, including the private nonprofit sectors, to identify a long-term funding solution for the regional transit system. In support of these programs, every month, over 1,500 officials and experts organize through COG to share best practices and promote regional coordination. There's no place like COG for this level of coordination in our region. Elected officials, senior member, jurisdiction staff, and planners alike convene at COG to tackle issues that affect the district and our region as a whole. COG provides access to 130 in-house experts on a range of technical fields in transportation, the environment, land use, housing, public safety, and more. COG expertise saves members money through research consultants, regional analysis, and publications. Being a member of COG ensures that the city's point of view is heard and your leadership is at the table. I'm happy to report that the district is taking advantage of COG Cooperative Purchasing Program, which is designed to reduce costs through volume purchasing for the region. The district is currently using contracts for road salt, health and wellness program services, and self-contained breathing units. Thank you for the opportunity to summarize some of this critical work we do at COG for the District of Columbia and for your support.
Thank you, Ms. Mercer. I have a few questions for you. Why don't we start with Commissioner Lukatos's testimony about that federal money? Are you familiar with that program?
Vaguely, and I know, so one, it's the first I've heard from the commissioner. I'm happy to follow up with him and make sure he talks directly to our staff. I don't want to misrepresent our staff's position, but I think it's working with DDOT and council leadership on being given the green light to apply for those funds. I know there's been discussions about it, and I think we've indicated certainly a willingness to do that if DDOT would like us to.
So you'll need to look into it a bit more before you can say definitively what's happening or what could happen.
That's right. I know it's come up. I know COG has asked the district, would you like us to apply for these funds? And I think there's been some discussion back and forth. So I don't think the absence of us applying for them is necessarily 100% in
Okay.
COG's court. So
You probably don't have a copy of the commissioner's statement,
no,
so
well,
we can
okay,
get that to you.
that'd be great. Thank you.
Um, You touched on this in your statement. Could you say just a little bit more about what COG is doing with the Metro funding issue?
Sure. I think you certainly recognize that Metro has a funding deficit of approximately 750 million for the next fiscal year, largely driven by three things. One, costs have risen with inflation for goods and services and personnel the last couple of years. There's been a tremendous amount of federal money that localities, our members, the district, and WMATA received. That funding is now not available to plug that hole. And then three, during the height of the pandemic, WMATA suspended or froze their member payments, and they're picking those payments back up. And there's a lag in their ability to bill the localities at the rate they would have if they build them each year with an escalator built in. So those three factors have resulted in a fairly large deficit. So the first thing that we have done is gather your CFO, your CAO. Chairman, you participated as well on one of the groups to confirm this deficit, what it encompasses, and then two, come up with a plan to address funding the next 2 fiscal years. And we issued a report that called on a wide range of things, identifying cost savings, one-time and reoccurring, looking at fare structure, looking at level of service being provided, and also looking at a budgetary move that many transit systems use, which is using out-year preventive maintenance dollars for current operational needs. It's not a great public policy to deploy, but almost every transit system does it to some degree in the country. And Metro is proposing to do that at a fairly high degree to help plug this hole. So we're working with Maryland, their General Assembly, their Governor Moore has put forth 150 million. Chairman, you had a letter with the mayor and Councilman Allen last week. Great letter suggesting some actions that Metro needs to take, but if those actions are taken, that 200 million roughly given would be available from the district share for next year. And then in Virginia, the number would be 130 million, and Virginia is a little bit different. They pay their Metro bill, half of it's paid at the state level in Richmond, and the other half is split between the local government members that are members of WMATA. And there is budget legislation working its way through the process in Richmond right now to address that 130 million. So the thought being, if we can achieve the next fiscal year or two, Metro will be funded. It can continue doing the good work that it does. But clearly, we need to have a broader conversation and take a step back about long-term sustainability for Metro and funding. I don't think going to your council and the mayor and Richmond, Annapolis, and the feds every year or two to ask for funding is a sustainable way to fund Metro. And certainly their cost structure, as is with current funding available, is not terribly sustainable. So we will pivot pretty quickly after the short-term funding hopefully is secured and have a broader conversation on Metro moving forward.
Thank you for that. I'm going to make a brief statement. You don't have to respond to this, but I just want to note that the numbers you mentioned, $200 million from the district, 150 million from Maryland, 130 million from Virginia. The district is the smallest of the three jurisdictions in terms of population and in terms of budget, and in terms of geography, and yet the district pays the most. I realize there's a formula for Metro Rails based on number of stations, not track miles, and adjusted population. This is a regional system that really ought to be funded more equally by the three jurisdictions, recognizing that not only is the system, is there a cost for using the system, but there's also a lot of potential benefit and probably much more potential development in Virginia and Maryland than is left in the district, taking advantage of the system. There was not a question in that. I do have several other questions. You, at the end of your statement, mentioned the cooperative purchasing program, and I was going to ask, does the district participate? You said in your statement, yes, you gave a couple of examples. Could the district government be purchasing more through the program, or what other goods or services does the cooperative purchasing program purchase that the district isn't right now purchasing?
Sure, I think that COG can do a more effective job at advertising this program to our members. That's number one, and that did not make it into my statement, but it's something we're working on this year, making sure that procurement offices understand kind of the wide variety of anything that a local government purchases, that we can purchase in bulk across 24 governments delivers savings. I think Arlington County, was it last year, the year before, saved $800,000 procuring, I think it was some Homeland Security equipment. So the answer is yes, I think there can probably be more. I'll get you a list of kind of all of the offerings that's on our contract list and the specifics of what the district is and is not purchasing.
All right. I would appreciate that. In your testimony, you also testified about electric vehicle charging.
Mm-hmm.
In the district, I don't really see it. This seems to be rolling out very slowly. Could you comment on that?
Sure. So there's billions of dollars, I think $5 or $6 billion available from the federal government to deploy EV charging stations. What will strengthen a locality's application to pull those dollars down is if you can demonstrate that you have coordinated your plan with the region that you live in. It scores a lot better for the individual, whether it's Arlington County, Montgomery County, or the District of Columbia. So we're working with all 24 jurisdictions to articulate how many charging stations are needed, where they would be, to make sure they're in all zip codes, not just wealthy zip codes, a rhyme or reason for how frequent those charging stations would be on roads or highways or byways. And then that plan will be used by all of our members when they apply for federal dollars. But the deployment itself, I can't get, I mean, it does seem a bit slow. There's the federal government wants there to be a universal type of charge. There's been disagreements with the big automakers, Tesla being one. You can't pull down federal dollars unless it's for one of those universal charging stations. So there's been some back and forth. I think those issues are being ironed out, and this plan is being worked on and will be delivered this year. So
I'll win this year.
I'll check. I'm not sure the date.
Okay.
Yeah.
When I sent a letter beginning of January with appointments to the different committees,
Mm-hmm.
I included in the Emergency Preparedness Council. Does the EPC meet these days?
You know, I asked that question. I don't think it is met as frequently as it used to. I think that was Councilwoman Pinto is who you
Yes.
appointed. I'll get back to you with its schedule. I asked about the frequency and I was told it was more infrequent now than it used to be.
Yeah, well, more infrequent could mean like once every couple of years.
It
so-
could. No, you're right. I'll get you a readout of that.
Okay, I mean, there used to be rather healthy discussions at the those Emergency Preparedness Council sessions talking about coordinating on issues such as emergency response, even I think maybe procurement, although I think that might have been handled more by the CA committee. There is a value though in the region meeting to talk about emergency preparedness.
Yeah, I'll get you a run. I think there's maybe a dozen tabletop exercises that COG is running this year on emergency preparedness. The most recent included all the emergency officers on, a potential attack on our electrical system. So that included the district. So they're certainly engaging in that space, but that specific council, I will check to see the plans for meeting this year.
In your statement, I think you said the district is paying about $1 million. I don't remember where I saw that, but that was somewhere in here. Is it
Yeah, it was towards the beginning on membership and then a few other,
the first page?
yeah, first page.
DC
third
paid
paragraph.
approximately $1 million for COG membership. Do you think, and that's not just membership, but that's the other committees as well. Do you think that amount will remain the same this year or that it will go up?
I will check. It's based on population. Projections. I think I will have to check. I think it went down year over year for the district last year. But those membership, it's driven by population estimates, which we coordinate with your planning director.
Yes, but the million, I assume, was more than just membership.
It was
think it was like
membership,
farm.
the Regional Public Safety Fund, the Environmental Fund, and the Farm Fund.
Yeah,
I think a couple of those are also population driven, but the largest piece of that million is the COG membership.
all right, she'll get back to me on that.
Yep.
So you get back to me on that, a sense of whether these fees or dues are going to go up. You'll get back to me about the Emergency Preparedness Council, the Cooperative Purchasing Program, the list of some goods or services. There are some services purchased through that, aren't there? Or is it just goods?
There's some services. Yep, some professional services.
And then when you'll get back on when the EV plan will be.
Mhm. And I'll connect with the ANC commissioner as well and
Yes,
make sure we're responsive to his question.
give me just a second. I have no other questions for you.
Okay, thank you.
Nope, thank you. I will turn to the Office of Budget and Planning, and I have 3 witnesses before I call the agency. The witnesses are Amon George, who's a commissioner with ANC 4D06, Fritz Mulhauser, who is with the DC Open Government Coalition, and Eric Goulet, who listed himself as a public witness. I think, Mr. Mulhauser, you're the only one in person. Minutes for the online and 4 minutes for in person. You get a reward for being in person. Let me start with Amon George, Commissioner George.
Thank you, Chairman Mendelson. My name is Amon George. I'm an advisory neighborhood commissioner for single member district 4D06 in Petworth. I'd like to focus my testimony on the current state of enforcement against unsafe driving in the district, which I believe is in many ways a product of budget choices and policies made by the district. DC, along with many cities in the country, has correctly responded to concerns about over-policing of marginalized communities by deprioritizing the role of police in traffic enforcement. But getting the police out of the business of regular traffic stops has to be met with a concurrent increase in the city's ability to do civil enforcement like towing and booting cars used to break traffic laws with impunity. Anybody who follows this issue knows how common it is to see vehicles rack up inordinate fines with no penalty. I saw a car on Twitter a few weeks ago with over $20,000 in tickets issued, including parking tickets issued over and over on the exact same block. You see instances of cars with fake or no tags being used to commit other crimes. If you follow this issue, it's clear that as of right now, our city simply does not impose swift and certain punishments on these vehicles by booting or towing them. I would encourage OBP to help ensure that traffic safety enforcement is adequately funded in the district's budget this year, so that when 311 requests come in reporting these vehicles, residents have some hope of actually seeing swift action taken. Last year, the mayor's budget had proposed to cut FTEs from booting and towing operations. That can't happen again. We need a substantial expansion, especially of boot crews who aren't limited by tow lot capacity. Chairman Mendelson, I've testified about this in other hearings as well. but I believe that a driver of the consistent under-resourcing of traffic safety enforcement is that the district's budget process currently treats towing and booting purely as a cost center. This seems incredibly inaccurate and creates terrible incentives in the budgeting process. News reporting has estimated that vehicles in DC are carrying nearly $1 billion in unpaid traffic fines. Surely booting and towing efforts will help increase recovery of these fines and decrease rates of underpayment. But the district budget right now does not account for any of that revenue. It would be as if the IRS decided to ignore how much money they bring in from additional audits. I encourage OPP to work with DPW to come up with a way to account for enforcement revenues so that booting and towing isn't just wrongly treated as a cost center for the city. Ensuring that these efforts are fully funded is a critical safety issue to achieve our city's Vision Zero goals and to improving public safety. Drivers driving recklessly with impunity can be seen every day on our streets. Indeed, just in 2024, we've had 5 people killed in hit-and-run crashes. And MPD would surely tell you that vehicles with fake, fraudulent, expired tags or tags with huge fines are often being driven by people engaged in other crimes. The district needs to step up to get these cars off the roads more quickly and reliably and provide the resources needed to get there. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Mulhauser.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, I'm Fritz Mulhauser. I'm the co-chair of the legal committee of the DC Open Government Coalition, member of the board of the coalition and a Ward 6 resident. Our attention is drawn to the budget process of the district because of our concerns for a very specific legislative move, which was not able to be funded, which we trace to the fiscal impact statement attached to the bill. I speak of the police reform bill, which included a welcome expansion of public access to police discipline records, opposed by the mayor, the police employees group, and the police department. Ever since the Police Reform Commission surfaced the ideas drawn from other states which have found it helpful. And so when the police reform bill included that expansion, it was perhaps no surprise that the fiscal impact statement would be at issue. The executive is well known for quoting high costs of transparency initiatives, going back to the attempt to stop access to body cam videos by quoting high prices of processing. But in this case, we took a look at the $5 million cost estimate for expanded FOIA access in order to understand where that came from, because under our law, fiscal impact statements have a preclusive effect. You cannot pass legislation if it's not funded at the level in those statements. Our review of the fiscal impact statement in this case showed that it's not sound work, and the office gave no defense of it at the oversight hearing of the business committee when we raised the questions, and they followed up at the government witness session, and there was no address of our questions. The research was limited. The fiscal impact statement had no basis required in the statute to support the number 5 million, which is based on additional staff needed. But that would have required studying the processing of FOIA, efficiencies or inefficiencies that are presently available. The experience of other states would have been useful, and serious research could have gone into it, but the statement is brief. It has no basis whatsoever. So we used the Freedom of Information Act to gain the CFO's research file. It has nothing. It has a series of emails, 4 or 5, from the executive only. That's the sole research support for their estimate. And they were all redacted. So we couldn't even see what the executive based its estimates on. And their source of this information is questionable given the opposition that they've had to this proposed expansion for years. So we come today simply to ask that you direct an evaluation long sought by staff and council members of fiscal impact statement soundness because of the powerful effect they have. and our experience is it's not sound. And second, that you consider changing the process so that they're delivered timely, allowing proper answer. In this case, it was delivered the same day as the markup. There was no time for dialogue. And third, that you consider expanding the sources of fiscal impact statements themselves, as Congress allows many different sources to weigh in on their budget fiscal impacts of legislation estimates. There's room for improvement here. Our case studies are detailed in our written statement. We add the second, which is a terrible account. I'm sure you all in the council recall it, stemming from the 2012 estimate for presumptive insurance coverage of fire and emergency workers, where an $80 million cost estimate languished, stopping the legislation for 4 years. A revised one only cut it in half and has proven completely incorrect. So this is a process, Mr. Chairman, that doesn't work and needs a fresh look. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Mr. Mulhauser. Mr. Goulet.
Good afternoon, Chairman Mendelson, council members, and council staff. My name is Eric Goulet, Ward 3 representative for the DC State Board of Education. I am pleased to join you at today's performance oversight hearing to provide testimony regarding the Office of Budget and Planning and how to improve the DC budget process. Today, I will be testifying in my individual capacity as a board member and not on behalf of the board. This will be part one of my 5-part testimony on the funding crisis facing public education in Ward 3 and across our city. Ward 3 schools face devastating potential cuts in buying power, ranging from approximately 5% to 25% in the initial FY25 individual DCPS school budgets. And if something is not done to add funding, these cuts will destabilize every school in Ward 3. The professionalism and expertise that the CFO's Office of Budget and Planning brings to the DC budget process every year demonstrates how DC's Central Budget Office is one of the best state-level budget offices in the country. I had the privilege to work for the Office of Budget and Planning in 2016, and with them in 6 different professional capacities from 2003 to 2022. The leadership of Eric Kennedy and Kenneth Evans was instrumental in helping the District of Columbia weather the Great Recession, close a $322.1 million structural budget gap in 2011, and to obtain a AAA bond rating with 2 months cash on hand. However, OBP will acknowledge that they are not the policymakers and thus cannot prevent most ill-advised decisions that are adversely impacting the district's budget process. I will testify about 4 scenarios that I have with the current budget process that can exacerbate the fiscal crisis we face in adequately funding DC's public schools and eroding the public trust. First, the budget process should start later. Second, the Schools First in Budgeting Act is not a valid law. Number 3, the DC Council devalues public testimony on education and refuses to perform adequate oversight. And number 4, the DC Council overspending threatens the ability to fund our schools. I will discuss 2 of these concerns today, and I will see you again on February 27th to resume with number 3. Concern number 1, the current DC budget schedule is an archaic remnant of an era before the district budget autonomy, when DC was required to approve the budget in May to secure approval of the budget by Congress before the congressional summer recess. Now that DC has budget autonomy, the council should not force the mayor to release the local school budgets prior to the release of the CFO's end of February revenue estimate. Since public school budgets make up a significant percentage of the district's overall budget, this forces the executive branch to be overly cautious in budgeting for schools because the executive needs to assume a worst-case scenario with the February revenue estimate, particularly during tight fiscal times like we are experiencing now. Section 103D of the Schools First in Budgeting Act requires that initial individual DCPS school budgets must be submitted 42 calendar days before the submission date of the district's annual budget. In the annual budget submission resolution, the council should give the mayor 2 weeks after the February revenue estimate to release the initial DCPS school budgets. This allows 2 full weeks for LSAT's review during the petition period, and then the full budget can be transmitted by late April. This schedule accommodates council's full 70-day statutory review period with 2 votes on the budget a full week before its July council recess. For example, this year's March 22nd budget submission date required initial school budgets to be released February 9th. However, an April 25th budget submission date would have allowed the initial school budgets to be released on March 14th, and the council would still have a full 70 days to approve the budget by July 4th, and then an extra week to approve the Budget Support Act before council goes on its summer recess on July 12th. Concern 2, I agree with the principle of what the council was trying to achieve with its Schools First in Budgeting Act, which is to have more reliable and stable funding for individual DCPS schools. And I want to acknowledge that you, Mr. Chairman, restored much needed funding for Ward 3 schools during the council's FY24 budget process that avoided 5% cuts to the current fiscal year. Unfortunately, Section 104 of the Schools First in Budgeting Act clearly violates Section 442 of the DC Home Rule Act and constitutional separation of powers principles. The council does not have the authority to mandate the mayor to submit specific budget marks for schools, neither outright nor by the bill's prescriptive statutory formula. This purported law created tremendous confusion among DC parents last year about why it was not being followed by the mayor. An executive branch proposes a budget and the legislature amends and approves it. The council can require the mayor to submit information with the budget, but it isn't allowed to dictate the expenditure numbers in the mayor's submission. DC Council has the statutory authority to request a legal opinion from the independent office of the Attorney General under DC Code Section 1-30181A2, as you just utilized regarding the SNAP funding. If you really believe the Schools First in Budgeting Act is a valid law, Mr. Chairman, please request an opinion from Attorney General Brian Schwab so there can be clarity. I would love to find out that I am wrong about the validity of this law. I'm concerned that this year we will see a repeat of the unproductive finger pointing by the DC Council at the mayor for not following the Schools First in Budgeting Act when the shared focus of the legislative and executive branches needs to instead be on working together to ensure all our public schools are fully funded in FY25. That includes my testimony for today. I'm available to answer any questions that you or your colleagues have for me, and I will give part 2 of my testimony on February 26th at the DGS Performance Oversight hearing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your time today.
Thank you, Mr. Goulet. I do have a few questions. Let me just check. Commissioner George, your testimony is interesting, but the Office of Budget and Planning processes the budget. I don't want to diminish its role because it's an important role, but it doesn't make policy decisions such as, and I'm looking at this from your statement, that OBP help ensure that traffic safety enforcement is adequately funded. That's a decision by the mayor, which then is carried out with regard to Office of Budget and Planning and ensuring that the budget documents reflect the mayor's decision. Am I missing something there?
No, you're not necessarily, Chairman Mendelson. The one thing I would add is that I think technical fix that I think is really important to get right is helping the executive branch and DPW figure out how to adequately account for the revenue effects of traffic enforcement operations, which are not done in any meaningful way today. And that's something that I believe can help ensure that traffic safety enforcement is adequately funded going forward, and hopefully something that OBP could help get right.
Well, that gets to my second question to you. On the second page of your testimony, you said, I believe a driver of the consistent under-resourcing of traffic safety enforcement is that the district's budget process currently treats towing and booting purely as a cost center. This seems incredibly inaccurate and creates terrible incentives in the budgeting process. Now, I get that the reason why we have traffic safety enforcement is for traffic safety. But to the extent that the budget treats it as a cost center, which I think you mean a revenue center, maybe I misunderstand, the council from time to time, and I think the executive from time to time has recognized that resources that result in revenue collection actually increase the revenues available for spending. So the incentive, again, I'm looking at your language, creates terrible incentive. The incentive is let's do more traffic safety enforcement because then we'll get more money. So what am I missing here?
Um, yeah, this is helpful, a helpful point for me to clarify. As it stands right now, revenue from towing and booting is not tracked in the budget as revenue that comes in from that activity. So my understanding is that revenue from automated traffic enforcement all kind of gets put into one pool, but the revenue that would come from additional towing and booting operations isn't tracked in the budget. And so when the city is drawing up its budget with regards to funding those activities at DPW, if it decreases the number of resources that it's putting into tow and boot enforcement, it does not view that as correspondingly decreasing revenue coming in, because as of right now, it doesn't account for revenue coming in. That's why the analogy that I used was it's as if the IRS treated additional auditors as purely cost centers for the IRS and without accounting for the money that additional IRS auditors would bring in. That's, I think, the best analogy that I have for the way the budget process currently treats tow and boot operations. They don't currently estimate incremental tow and boot operations bringing in additional revenue for the city.
Yeah, all I can speak to is the council, what the council does. Because I'm not part of the executive branch. I don't know exactly how they formulate their budget. But from the council's perspective, I can tell you that from time to time, typically it's the Transportation and Environment Committee will increase enforcement and the chief financial officer will recognize additional revenue, which is all part of the council's consideration of the budget. So we do see the revenues, even though you may not, which does raise an issue. Why is it that you don't? Although it may be those revenues might be in volume one of the budget books, because the volume one has a very detailed table of revenue sources. And I'm seeing some nodding heads, so I think it might be there. But we do recognize that there is revenue gain from enforcement.
Yeah, I've asked this question in the past, and it certainly accounts for revenue from general enforcement, like the automated traffic enforcement cameras that we see go up. But my understanding from prior discussions with DPW and staff at the Council on Transportation, or at the Committee of Transportation, is that the budget as it stands right now doesn't estimate additional revenue to be brought in by more towing and booting specifically.
I'm going to thank you. I'm going to move to Mr. Goulet. At the end of your testimony, you said the shared focus of the legislative and executive branches needs to instead be on working together to ensure all our public schools are fully funded in fiscal year 2025. I don't know what to do about that. I would agree with you that the mayor should be working with the council, but as you know, the mayor through the chancellor releases to the schools what their budgets are, and did that a week ago with cuts, either actual cuts or a reduction in why am I blanking on the phrasing? Purchasing
Buying
power.
power? Yeah.
Purchasing power. The council had nothing to do with that. That was done unilaterally. So I would think the criticism is better focused on the executive for not working with the council to ensure stable funding.
Well, in response to that, last year's budget process is what I'm referencing, fiscal year 24 is where the bulk of the dialogue early on with both the DCPS hearing and the submission of those budgets was about the mayor not following the school's first budgeting act, which I thought was an incredible kind of red herring. I think many people are concerned it's not a valid law. And the focus really should have been on how does everybody work together to try to find savings to make sure our schools are fully funded. I mean, we really need at a fiscal point where we need both branches to work together productively, collaboratively to try to solve this, because there is right now not only a crime crisis, but a fiscal crisis developing in our city. And if we don't get these school budgets right again this year, we're going to have an education crisis on our hands because our teachers are leaving, and like these
Well,
cuts
I
will
agree with you on
devastate our
the-
schools.
I agree with you on the stability. And that is the policy of the council, that there should be stability in individual schools' budgets. You may disagree with the law, but the intent of the law is stable funding. And what the council did last year was to increase the dollars in individual schools' budgets so that they were either held even or got additional money. That's what the council did. And so I'm only got into this because your comment at the end about, well, the two branches should work together, but neither last year nor this year have I seen the executive working with the council before telling the schools that their budgets are going to be cut.
I think, Mr. Chairman, as you know, the mayor proposes the budgets. You know, they'll take the first stab at this, but I think what really is necessary is there to be kind of a toning down of a lot of the rhetoric that we sometimes see during the budget, and real shared focus on making sure our kids are put first. I remember when Vince Gray was mayor and council chairman during the Great Recession, public education was put first above everything else. And we made sure our schools were not cut. They even received their inflation adjustments during that period of time. And I think that really is important. We are, you know, our kids right now, we're seeing a crisis of violence occurring with children across the city, youth being lost, through crime. And what we need to do is make sure that education is the cornerstone for those youth, and that we put that ahead of everything else as funds tighten up. Because if we
Well, I
don't fund
agree, and
education in the city.
that's what the council did last year, and that's what I hope we'll be able to do this year.
And I
Let
would
me
like to
turn-
commend you for that, Mr. Chairman. That was really important for our Ward 3 schools, and we really do appreciate your efforts on that.
And schools across the city. Thank you. Let me turn to Mr. Mulhauser. Let me see. I did have some questions for you, and now I am blanking. Office of Budget and Planning, which is before us, is not the agency that does or the division within the OCFO that does the revenue, the fiscal impact statements. That would be at the hearing that the Committee on Business and Economic Development has on the OCFO overall.
That was our understanding as well when we testified to the Committee on Business and Economic Development about the OCFO. And our questions were followed up by the chairman at his hearing of government witnesses from the OCFO. However, we've been encouraged by numerous council members and the staff, which shares the concern that came from our case studies. The staff and members share a very broad concern that the fiscal impact statement process and its role in council dealing with budgeting is so incorrectly founded when the statements are late and weak that they encouraged us to come and chat with you today.
You know, sometimes I appreciate my colleagues. You mentioned did you used to work for the General Accountability Office?
I spent 10 years at the Government Accountability Office when it was
Yes.
called GAO, correct?
Yes. Because you mentioned in your testimony a few minutes ago that Congress relies on multiple sources. Could you elaborate on that?
Yes, I'm not expert in these matters, but I reviewed some CRS, Congressional Research Service reports about cost estimation in order to just become a little more conversant. And according to the CRS, Congress gets financial impact information from a wide range of sources, including the Congressional Budget Office, under the Congressional Budget Act, they're required to answer requests. And from the Office of Management and Budget on behalf of the executive, as well as the budget committees and tax committees. And the critical difference is, first, they get multiple sources, but second, none have the power over legislation that we grant through our statute that says if the fiscal impact stated by the OCFO is not met with appropriation, the statute won't take effect. There's no such provision in Congress. And of course, they're not bound as we are by balanced budget requirements. But my point is simply, the council now does its own fiscal impact statements for emergency legislation. You have staff who know how to do it. We're raising questions about the CFO quality of work in this regard. And we suggest it's time to consider taking it back into the council's overview and then seeking multiple sources, just as the Congress does.
I'm not sure we have the authority to do that under the Home Rule Act.
Okay.
The chief financial officer, as it exists today, is a creation of the 1997 Revitalization Act, as I recall. And we are unique in that we have an independent chief financial officer. I believe the law, the Home Rule Act specifies the duties with regard to the preparation of the fiscal impact statements. So I'm just saying, I think we might be constrained in that regard.
The statute does provide the authority for the CFO to do this, but the council could change the statute to bring within its ambit the preparation of the same necessary estimates to guide budgeting, simply relying on its own staff and other experts as the Congress does. I hope that could be a change that would be considered.
Again, I think this is in the Home Rule Act. I don't think it's something we can change.
Okay.
Um,
The quality of the statements, it cries out for examination. That's our fundamental point.
I
And we've heard
understand.
it echoed throughout this building as we've tried to educate ourselves. We began with a concern that a single fiscal impact statement seemed ill-founded. And we discovered that even their own internal rules were not followed in its preparation. They didn't do the research that's required in their own internal manual. They didn't do the levels of review to assure quality that are called for. And if that kind of quality mistake is repeated across multiple estimates, it's time to think of a different way of doing it.
Well, let me be clear, because I haven't said this, but I have often felt that I've often been critical of fiscal impact statements. So even though I'm pushing back with regard to whether we have the authority to change the law, because I believe it's in the Home Rule Act and beyond our touch, that doesn't mean I disagree with you. Could put that more positively. I do agree with you that sometimes these fiscal impact statements reflect too much a bias from the executive branch agency that doesn't support legislation. I am going to look at your statement in more detail because much of your focus is on the police accountability legislation. And I share the view that that legislation is very important. Not only should there be accountability, but with regard to law enforcement, accountability breeds trust. And trust is a critical component of effective law enforcement. So I will look at this in more detail.
In that regard, Mr. Chairman, it was so disappointing that when we saw the research basis for the fiscal impact statement that has prevented that law for taking effect for a year, the research basis includes not a whisper of inquiry to any other state which has done similar expansions, not any consultation with any experts. It simply relies on executive estimates, and the MPD has a history of incorrect interpretation of the law of privacy exemptions and redacts and takes away much of files that it should not, according to both the courts and the Office of Open Government. So even if they were to do a careful estimate and prediction of the volume of new work under the Police Reform Act expansion of access, they have a protocol for doing the work that is incorrect and expensive. So there is no basis for their financial estimate that's given in either the published statement or in their research record. And the entire effort already of their agency to comply with FOIA is incorrect because of overwork, over-redaction, and they're famously the most delayed and appealed from agency in the city as they make mistakes in their FOIA denials. So this is the system in which the CFO relies on an agency whose estimates are not credible. It has to be looked at.
You mentioned you FOIA'd the emails from MPD that were the basis for the fiscal impact statement?
The CFO FOIA that we submitted was responded to with emails showing the sender, so we could tell it was MPD, but the texts were redacted. We asked for the texts from MPD and they didn't answer our request, and we appealed and they've ignored the appeal. So it's another interesting
Well, I
piece
was
of
gonna
the fiscal impact statement that neither the committees have time to evaluate what they receive, because it's often late, nor does the public. So it's a non-transparent.
I understand. So if I
Analysis.
asked you for a copy of the emails that you received,
I
would
can
not-
certainly provide it. It's pages of black marks.
it would not reveal anything to me because of
No,
the
only
redaction.
the sender was left unredacted.
Interesting. When did you file the appeal?
We appealed and it has been decided and rejected on the grounds that those emails were intra-agency deliberative exchanges of views on policy and law. We said, that's ridiculous. These are facts and figures. MPD must have said, we assume 500 requests and it takes 10 people to handle them and the cost is so many dollars. But we couldn't see the content of the MPD
So have you
response,
appealed that?
and the appeal was rejected.
And that's the end of it.
That's the end of it unless we go to court.
Are you going to go to court?
We're strongly considering it.
And what's your deadline?
Well, the question is 6 months of waiting to get before a judge to second guess the denial of our appeal, is that something to do? And we'd be happy to consider it with your encouragement.
Sure, but my question is, what's the deadline? There is a
We have no
deadline.
deadline. You can file, there is no deadline for filing a court suit to compel a FOIA request that's been denied by an agency. You can do it at any point.
All right, thank you. I have no more questions. for you.
Thanks very much.
I thank you to each of the witnesses. Let me turn to Eric Kennedy, who's the Deputy Chief Financial Officer. When you're ready, and good afternoon.
Can you hear me, Chairman?
Yes.
Okay. Good afternoon. Should I begin?
What's that?
Should I begin?
Yes.
Okay. Good afternoon, Chairman Mendelson and members of the Committee of the Whole. I am Eric Kennedy, Deputy Chief Financial Officer and Budget Director of the Office of Budget and Planning for the Office of the Chief Financial Officer. I am very pleased to appear before you today to testify on the FY 2023 performance of OBP and outline my plans for the agency in FY 2024 and beyond. I am joined by Sherry Greenfield, Associate Deputy CFO. Also in attendance are Kenneth Evans, Director of the Capital Budget, Stacy Ann White, Director of the Operating Budget, and Samuel Terry, Director of Financial Planning and Analysis and Management Services, who may assist in answering questions from the committee. I will cover the following areas in my remarks: fiscal years 2023 and 2024 year-to-date operating expenditures, FY 2023 performance, and FY 2024 operational goals and accomplishments. OBP is one of the key programmatic offices within the OCFO. In FY 2023, OBP operated within its local revised budget of $6.93 million, spending $6.895 million, or more than 99% of our available local budget funds. Through the 16th of February 2024, we have obligated or expended $2.34 million, or 35.3% of our FY 2024 approved budget of $6.36 million. We expect to end the fiscal year within our current budget. In FY 2023, during FY 2023, the district made many changes to its budget, and OBP successfully processed these changes and tracked and reported on the budget throughout the year. We also worked with the mayor and the council to produce the district's 2023 supplemental budget and the FY 2024 approved budget and financial plan. The district ended FY 2023 with a balanced budget. OBP worked closely with Mayor Bowser's budget team to develop the FY 2024 budget, which was submitted to the council on March 23rd, 2023. Between April and July, we worked closely with the council staff to review the budget, and the council approved the district's budget, which was transmitted to Congress on July 14th, 2023. After completion of the 2024 approved budget and financial plan, OBP focused on lessons learned. I will now discuss our key budget execution tools. Financial review process, or FRPs. District agencies prepare and submit monthly FRP reports to OBP for review and analysis. We use the FRP to analyze agencies' projected year-end expenditures and revenue collections and compare them to agency budgets. If agencies report spending pressures, we work with the mayor's budget team as they propose changes to resolve these pressures. In FY 2023, we worked closely with the agency fiscal officers and the executive office of the mayor to process a total of 220 operating and capital reprogramming requests, of which 92 were sent to the council for approval. OBP is the district's central unit responsible for reviewing and approving all requests from agencies to establish or modify grant budget authority. In FY 2023, OBP processed 795 grant budget modifications, of which 245 required passive approval by the council. We continue to improve budget processes and management. Following the completion of the FY 2023 budget supplemental and approved FY 2024 budget, OBP conducted our annual formulations lessons learned. We determined that for future budget formulation cycles, it is critical that we clearly establish the required timeline for OCFO certification of both the mayor's proposed supplemental budget and the annual budget and financial plan for submission to the council. OBP must have 10 days after pencils down to conduct the required diligence needed to ensure that, 1, the budget and financial plan are balanced, including any necessary technical adjustments that are necessary. The proposed budget act, BSA, along with the local budget act, or LBA, are thoroughly reviewed for financial and legal sufficiency. The documents required by the council are properly vetted and assembled. And 4, the timely publication of the budget volumes on the web and physical books. OBP staff members worked diligently with the OCFO's Office of the Chief Information Officer to sunset the Budget Formulation Application, or BFA, which was the district's legacy budget formulation application. In place of the BFA, an interim budget system was developed with staggered rollout between October 2023 and February 2024. OBP closed 15 Federal Highway Trust Fund projects and 1 local transportation project, moving a total budget of more than $4.87 million back to the HTF master projects. OBP expanded the Capital Assets Replacement Scheduling System, or CARS, to include inventoried assets on all 42 DC Housing Authority properties, with condition assessments being completed and turned over to the Office of the Deputy Mayor and Deputy Mayor for Planning and Economic Development, or DEMPED, for evaluation and next steps. Additionally, plans are being formulated to integrate 2 event DC properties into the CARS portfolio, namely National Park and the Walter E. Washington Convention Center. Over 316,000 district capital assets are now in CARS, including over 5,000 vehicles, for which the CARS data is used regularly as a part of the budget formulation process. This program has been recognized nationally by industry leaders as a best-in-class method to categorize and monitor capital assets. Demonstrations and presentations have been given to 2 other major market cities, Denver, Colorado, and Atlanta, Georgia, and to industry associates related to municipal funding, such as the Government Financial Officers Association, or GFOA, the Institute for Asset Management, IAM, and the Asset Leadership Network, LAM. Our goal for FY 2024 is to continue to build on our successes in meeting the OCFO's strategic objectives of creating a climate of continuous improvement. OBP's key operational goals are as follows: work with the mayor and the council to develop a supplemental budget for FY 2024 and a balanced budget and financial plan for FY 2025. Work closely with the OCIO and the team implementing the district's integrated financial system, or DIFS, as they develop the new Oracle-based budget system that will integrate with the core financial system within DIFS in the near future. Continue to ensure the timely development, review, and submission of FRPs. Continue to manage and improve the use of JIRA, which is a system to manage and track reprogrammings, O-type, dedicated taxes, budget modifications, interagency modifications, and temporary full-time equivalent requests. This automated system has improved the formal process by reducing the time it takes to process these actions, increasing transparency of the status of these actions, and eliminating or significantly reducing the year-end flurry of these actions. JIRA has also been an effective tool in managing the administration of the district's American Revenue Rescue Plan Act, ARPA funding. OBP collaborated with the central OCFO divisions, agency OCFO teams, and the Mayor's Office of Budget and Performance Management, or OBPM, to streamline the process and reporting of authorization of ARPA-funded transactions in JIRA. This process has significantly enhanced the transparency and monitoring and reporting of these actions by funding source, by agency, and by program-specific projects. We will continue to manage the Spending Pressure Task Force to quickly identify emerging spending pressures and work collaboratively with the city administrator's budget team to develop effective gap closing plans, and continue to improve capital budget management and oversight by ensuring that the FY 2025 through FY 2030 capital improvement plan remains within the 12% debt cap. In FY 2024, OBP successfully launched the district's grant application system, DGAS, which is a new online application to manage the transmission, workflow, and reporting of the district's grant budget authority process. The benefits of this new system are improved transparency and streamlined process for submitting and tracking agency grant requests, expanded access for OCFO agency staff to access and track the progress of requests at any stage of the approval workflow and generate status reports, and real-time email notifications to the OCFO agency staff when OBP posts comments as the requests are being promoted through the stages of the workflow. In conclusion, Mr. Chairman, currently OBP staff members are working with OBPM to develop the proposed FY 2025 budget and financial plan for transmittal to the council on March 20th. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the entire OBP team for their hard work and professionalism over the past year. We look forward to working with the council and other policymakers during the consensus process to develop a transparent and balanced budget for FY 2025. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my remarks. I would be pleased to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. I do have a few questions, so I'm going to start with this. Mr. Goulet in his testimony talked about the budget process should start later. You were here, you heard his testimony. I've had a couple of discussions with senior leadership in the executive branch. They're feeling a lot of pressure trying to get a budget basically done with the 10 days pencils down. That means March 10th, because the budget comes to us on March 20th when the revenue estimates come out February 28th. So really a very tight time schedule. What are your thoughts on the schedule?
Well, obviously, from my perspective, and I'll take a narrow view and then I'll expand it. My perspective is, with regard to my role, to the extent I'm given the 10 days that I need, meaning the budget stops moving, plan is balanced, I'll meet whatever deadline you give us, as long as I take my 10 days. The time frame between when the revenue estimates come out and when they have to actually, they being the mayor's office, mayor and city administrator's office, they have to actually submit the budget to your office, but also meet my requirements for pencils down date, is rather short. But I'm in no way implying that it's imperfect or it should be different. I'm only saying that's my observation. So
What's your observation that it's?
that it's short. It is a short period of time to do that after the revenue estimates, specifically when you think about when you want to go, when you want to send schools, when you want to send the school budgets out for their review. A lot of folks don't know this, but that is probably mechanically one of the most difficult budgets for us to deliver. And I'll take the law out of this conversation, the recent legislation out of it, where it's been kind of back and forth about what should be submitted. I'll take that out of the discussion. If you recall, many, many years ago, during the late Marion Barry period, he had asked that, and actually I was in a different role then, he asked me if there was a way of putting all of schools in one volume. I wasn't sure it was possible, but I did it. But when I did that, we did a reorganization, well, schools did a reorganization, not OBP. And I think it's much more transparent now, but it is voluminous. And it's a lot of work, not just on the policy side, but on the budget mechanics side. And that agency in itself, we have to do special things to get that agency to a place where I'm comfortable, the executive budget team is comfortable, And even when it comes to your team, there's still a lot of special things that we have to do. And it has nothing to do with the budget system. It's simply because it's an extremely complex budget to pull together. And I think this is pretty much the case everywhere, okay? So again,
What do you mean everywhere? Everywhere in this
outside of
country?
district,
Mhm.
I think it's, I have some colleagues around the country that I talk to, and forget about the budget mechanics necessarily, but just the process of delivering a school's budget can be very difficult, and very time consuming. And so while I'm not advocating that the time be extended, nor am I saying I'm not saying it should or shouldn't be extended because that's not my role. I'm simply saying my observation is that from the time the revenue estimates are published, which is usually the end of the month of February, to the time that pencils down now has to be met, unlike in the past where it just, well, you don't have to meet the 10th, but I have to take my 10 days. But it's a short time. It's very difficult. So, and that's just schools. But that's usually the most difficult one for us. Now, the great news is, the wonderful news is that on the mayor's side and the council side, there is expertise. You have someone in your budget office that's an expert. The council, a mayor, obviously, they have all of their employees in DCPS, they're experts. And so that helps us a great deal. Without that, this would be almost impossible.
So what you're saying is that the detail in the, I think it's volume 3, which is the school budgets.
Yeah,
Because it details the individual school budgets, all that has to be done. My recollection is all that has to be done roughly 10 days before the 10 days pencil down.
yes, and that's impossible. That's literally impossible. But it's
Okay.
not, let me say it a different way. That's not for me to say, I haven't seen it happen.
Well,
I've not seen it happen.
it is for you to say.
Well, I've never seen it happen. So let me, I want to recharacterize my statement. I've never seen it happen. You're talking, at least on my side, you're talking thousands on thousands of transactions that have to be reviewed before they even happen.
Because we're talking about individual school budgets.
You're talking about individual school budgets. You're talking about, I don't want to get too technical, but there's the accounting side of it, the budget attributes, the accounting side, that my office is responsible for. So the policy decision is one thing, but then as what Dr. Gandhi used to say, we're the bean counters. And in order for us to count the beans, we got to separate the beans. And it's very difficult. It's not impossible because we're very good at what we do, but it's time consuming.
Well, what if we were to say that volume 3, the individual schools' budgets didn't have to come to us on March 20th? That what we would get with regard to schools would be top line numbers for DCPS and for within DCPS, top line numbers for central school support, citywide, school-wide, and individual schools.
I would still not guarantee that the budget will be in your office on the 20th.
Why?
Because I cannot control whether or not the executive is able to meet pencils down on the 10th for everything else. So in the
For
past,
everything else, non-school.
non-school, that's right. I've made those kinds
Okay,
of
but
promises to
I'm
you
just-
in the past.
But I'm just asking you about schools. If we were
Um,
to exempt volume 3 from March 20th,
That would give me heartburn because I wouldn't know if I'm giving you a balanced budget.
well, you would have the top lines.
Top line is one thing, but I need to go through everything. I need to go through every single, I need to go through every single thing. I need to know that what the schools are looking at and what changes they're gonna make are gonna add up to that top line. Because
Well-
you're gonna present a budget to the schools. Maybe I don't understand you, but it sounds like what you're saying is this top line is the target.
Not target, that would be the proposed budget. Would
So
be as
then,
much a target as the rest of the budget, which sometimes does feel like a target when it's given to us. But no, it would be $1.2 billion for DCPS, and within DCPS, 800 million for schools, and then I can't remember, I say 70 million for central and whatever, 110 or 150 million for school support. Those would be the top lines.
But
And
how are
then,
those numbers derived at? Those
well,
school numbers?
They would have to, when they give us volume 3, they would have to, those numbers would have to add up.
Well, but are the budgets still with the schools for their review and comments and proposed changes? When I give you the budget, will the school still have it, looking at it and making some proposed changes?
Well, maybe, I'm just thinking the 10 days on top of the 10 days that's March 1st. So the
That-
revenue estimates are coming out next Thursday, Friday?
I'm not sure.
Well, it's the 28th or 29th. I just can't remember which day is the 28th or
Right.
the 29th. The revenue estimates are coming out next week. And 10 days on top of 10 days means that the school's budget has to be done March 1st, the next day, which sounds to me impossible. But well, I'm not quite getting what your discomfort is with not knowing the detail beneath the top line figure. A
So
budget is a budget. With a top line figure, you can't go over that.
the process is not always that simple. You could find yourself dealing with a RATA, and one would argue that I encourage that by not making sure that the best possible proposal was before me, before I recommended to the CFO that this budget can be certified. So I would be very uncomfortable with that. Very uncomfortable.
So if you were designing the timetable from scratch, it seems to me we want the revenue estimates the last day of the month because that's, and you don't do revenue estimates.
No.
So maybe you know more about it, but I'm going to consider you're not an expert on the revenue estimates. I would assume that the last day of the month makes the most sense because the cash reports are in
That's right.
and whatever other reports come from actually the previous month. And so the revenue estimates are best informed at the end of the month rather than the middle of the month. So do we do January 31st or February 29th, then with a later submission date to the council?
We do what around January 29th? Revenue estimates?
Yeah, I didn't say that very well. Revenue estimates on January 31st or February 28th? And then,
I'm not at liberty to make that kind of call, but I would suspect, based on the 18 years that I've been here, that prior to the end of February, because of all the things that happen, all the documents that come in and cash receipts and things like that, that January 29th is not possible. Because this isn't a new discussion. We've had this discussion many, many years about revenue estimates the day that they're delivered, but I'm not the deputy
well,
CFO.
actually, the real property tax bills go out, I think, February. Gosh, I was gonna say, no, the assessment notices go out.
Yeah, I
February.
mean, there's a host
I
of
haven't
things that
gotten my
happen.
assessment notice.
There's a lot of stuff that happens in February that people, people unlike yourself don't know about. And so that's why they say, oh, let's just change the revenue estimate. But I don't think it's that simplistic. And so
Okay, but
yeah.
so then what should the budget submission date be?
I'm not
Come on,
sure it's
Mr.
appropriate for me
Kennedy.
to say, because as I said, if the pencil's down, whenever the financial plan is balanced and it stops moving, I'll take my 10 days and I'll deliver the budget to the
Now,
council.
why do you really need 10 days?
I really should have more.
Why?
10 is the maximum, the lowest I can do and deliver you the budget. I mean, I can walk through all the details if you like. It may take a while.
Well, I don't want you to take more than 20 minutes, but walk through some of the details.
Okay. First, you have to ensure that every transaction is as we deem certified. That's not a 10-minute process. That requires a conversation with the AFO, sometimes the agent, cluster budget director, sometimes the ACFO, my director of the operating, sometimes capital, then myself and the associate. We make those decisions. There are times when there are things that can't be certified. And so now you got to go back and figure out a change, okay? And then there is vetting, ensuring that the money is actually there. Now, remember, we're not and I'm sorry, I don't want to sound condescending. I'm really speaking to the people watching this because you know this. It's a 4-year plan. So unless it's a one-time item, everything you do ripples through the plan. So every time you make a change, it ripples through the plan. And my team has to then go back and verify everything. So that's just like one part of it. If I look at the transactions required, so you'll remember the days when, and again, I don't want to be too over the top with this, but not your doing, but you'll remember the days when OBP was known for, bringing in air mattresses, staying in the office 72 hours straight because of the transactions. It is a lot of data. And you don't just throw the data in, it's entered at the very lowest level. And so you don't just enter it and not verify. You got to enter it and you got to verify it. And if there's a problem, you got to go back and you got to fix it. Now, I want to really get into more of the mechanical details, but then there's verification of this. There's verification of BSA, which is one of the things that you had a problem with me last year about, that you felt that you got a BSA that should have had some repeals in it, that it didn't. We just didn't have time. Then there is the LBA, which we have to ensure that every dollar is correct, right? The financial plan itself, just talking about the growth rates and the uneven growth rates. Again, these things don't mean anything to anybody outside of you and me and my team, and I guess Evan. This doesn't mean anything to anybody, but I think you know exactly what I mean. It's a very comprehensive process if it's done the right way. If it's done the wrong way, what you get is someone didn't see that there was legislation in the last year to budget for a specific item because it was 3 a.m. when that legislation got transmitted and via email, and there was no discussion about it. So we fixed that process so that we hope that can never happen again. It won't under our new process. And it's not just OBP. It's OBP, it's ORA, it's all of the agencies. So it's a collaborative effort. Then it's working with the mayor's team. So if I could, so I've been a member of the National Association for State Budget Officers, NASBO, for years. Nobody budgets like we do. No one has as complicated and as a voluminous budget book as the District of Columbia. Every word in that six volume, and in that 6-volume budget, my team writes it. Every word. Now, the agencies may develop the mission, they develop the mission statement, the summary of services, things like that. But the things that the council require that I describe in Table 5, in Table 5 narrative, now in Table 7, and so forth and so on, every word is written by this team. And that usually happens somewhere between 7 a.m. and whenever. We lose days during this time of the year. So, you could scale back on what you asked for in the budget book and we can reduce the size of it. That would help. But that budget book, every time we get a new CFO from the outside, they look at me and say, what is this? It's our budget book. And they cannot believe that we're able to put it together. And so when we get a policy decision, for example, you're not writing what's going to go in the budget book. You're communicating to us the transaction that we need to make. It is our experience that tells us how to write, how to describe that transaction. So you have accountants, budget people, finance people who now have learned how to translate counting a budget transactions into words. And we've spent years perfecting that. So those are just some of the reasons. And we're very good at it. We are very good at it. But when we don't have the time we need, we fall down. And I can't do that anymore.
So this was all to explain the 10 days.
This is explained in 10 days. 10 days, I'm being very generous with 10 days, sir. Believe me, my staff knows. I've talked to them. I said, this is how we're going to get it done. And that's 10 days because you also showed some grace to me by saying I could load the budget on the website. If I had to produce budget books that day, I couldn't do it. Because the printer needs a week. The printer, I think the printer needs a week or more, a week, at least a week. It's not in the old days. You'll remember the old days where we had a printer standing ready to print the book a night before, and then the books would fall apart because the glue didn't set. These aren't those days. The printer now is saying, no, we don't work like that. So I think it's reasonable to say we're still 100% charged in getting it done, but we need at least 10 days.
You mentioned that you're a member of OBOPO,
The who?
Office of, but no, the Organization of Budget.
NASBO. Yeah. I'm
That's
a
what I
member of
said,
NASBO.
NASBO. What did it say? OBOPO?
I think said Popo. That's like,
And that nobody else does a budget like ours.
not like
because-
this. No,
Meaning they do it better?
no. They don't do it worse or they don't do it better. It's just not as big. So
Not
if
as
you
much
read a table
information?
5 description and now with all respect to the budget, because I don't want to get phone calls around the country, there are some that produce big budget books. On average, they don't do what we do because I'll start getting calls when I leave here. But they don't describe things the way we do.
You mean they don't provide as much detail?
They do not provide as much detail. You'll remember the days during the Mayor Fenty era where I had to explain transactions within an agency or within a program and transactions that happen outside of a program but went to another agency. No one does that. Now, for the population, the district citizens, that is amazing transparency. For the advocates, that is amazing transparency. For the mayor, for the council, that is amazing transparency. But that comes with a price. It doesn't happen in 5 or 10 minutes. It just doesn't. Not to mention you run into technical problems. I don't care what kind of system you have. You're going to run into technical problems because sometimes a policy decision does not fit the logic of a budget system. And so we have to figure it out. And often that means the IT group is working with me, again, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, trying to figure out an IT solution.
Let me ask you this. So last year DIFS was rolled out, but there were some hiccups. In addition, my recollection is that DIFS still cannot be used for budget formulation, only for budget execution. What is the status of DIFS from OBP's perspective? And when will the budget formulation capability be rolled in?
So I want to first publicly thank the council for seeing the need to give us the 15 million that was removed from our budget proposal that the mayor submitted last year. That capital 15 million, which we needed to develop the second phase of the DIF system, which is the budget system. That money, I believe 10 million was put in 24, 5 million in 25. But in the interim, we had to have a budget system. So the team in front of you and one other person, Janine Fletcher, who's heading this up, and our OCIO team, they diligently worked from May to right now. They're still working to put a temporary budget system in place. I just got out of UAT, user acceptance testing today, or I'm getting out tomorrow for the very last module. So where we are with the DIF system is we are still in design phase because again, we don't have all the money till 25, but we're in design phase. But if I'm being candid with you, we're learning some things from our interim system that we're going to incorporate in the DIF system that I think is going to make it a better system than it would have been had we not learned those things from our interim system. So I'm more than willing to give you blow by blow as we move forward, give you updates on a regular basis. But right now we're in the design phase because all of that stopped when the money was removed. It all ended.
So this year's budget is being prepared with this interim system.
Yes, sir.
Next year's budget, meaning next year when we
I
do the
still
budget?
won't have that module completely built because I don't get the rest of the money until 25. But it's hard for me to say right now. I've got some ideas. So if you give me till my budget hearing to come back and maybe give you some more insight, Because remember, I'm literally just coming out of the last user acceptance testing tomorrow, Friday for, no, tomorrow for the financial plan piece. And I know how important that part is for you. Now, I do have some good news for you that I know you're going to be happy to hear.
Yes.
So, historically, we've done the budget supplemental in Excel. And from our CFO, Glenn, he said that's pretty much the way it's done around the country, that people will do it outside of the budget system. I have no experience outside of, before coming here, I was in private sector and that didn't happen. That was a long time ago. So we now, in our interim system, we're developing the supplemental in the budget system, which means, I know people watching this are like, what is he talking about? Budget attributes will be available the day that we close out the financial plan and say we're good with the financial plan. Budget attributes for the supplemental will be available. We no longer have to collect them outside of the process because we made it. We said we have to have this, and our technology group delivered. So that's great news for you and your budget director.
All right, so the question of when will this be available for budget formulation, I have to ask you that at the March 25th
Yes,
hearing.
let me try to give you some more insight by then, because right now I'm too focused on being able to deliver you a budget in this interim system. And so I've kind of scaled back on my involvement on the design of the second phase of diffs. I haven't abandoned it, I just scaled back a bit.
Let me ask you about cars. DC water assets,
Mhm.
that's not included.
No, no.
Is there any plan to do that?
Here, speak up your name.
Hi, I'm Sherry Greenfield. No, sir, that's, as far as I know, there's no plan to include DC Water's assets, and they're not currently included.
I didn't hear the last one.
DC Water's assets are not currently included in cars.
And there's no plan to include them.
Not that I'm aware of.
Well, you would be aware if there was a plan.
Yeah.
Oh,
I
there could
believe
be a
so.
conversation being had that we're not aware of, but as of right now, that is not on the table.
Going back to diffs. I know there've been some issues with diffs for the past year in the rollout. I remember a letter from January a year ago from the city administrator that diffs was providing very inaccurate information. Last month, we saw reprogramming for the Commission on Arts and Humanities because funds were improperly loaded into the wrong program. What is the status of diffs in the sense of in your responsibilities in budget execution, whether there's still hiccups with diffs?
So may I address that reprogramming?
Yes.
So likely that had nothing to do with diffs. We have had reprogrammings like that since the day I came into this government. If I'm being really truthful, I actually came in this government back in the 90s, early 90s, and I left just before the control board came, and we had those problems back then. And that simply means somehow the money got loaded in the wrong place. It has nothing to do with diffs. Now, it could be that the chart of accounts have changed, and we're all trying to learn the chart of accounts. And so it could be that someone thought it was that chart of account, but in fact, it was that chart of account. But that has nothing to do with diffs. You put the money in a place, that's where it is in diffs. So I wanted to get that out. With respect to budget execution, as our CFO Glenn has said, systems like this, enterprise systems this big, they take a while to stabilize. I'm fortunate enough that I've been responsible or participated in 3 implementations before ever coming to the district government. One, I managed myself, and what he said is 100% accurate. We are in the stabilization phase, and I see progress every day. We're better off today than we were last year. We had problems doing certain things, not necessarily because of the system, but could have been learning curve. In some cases, it was simply, we're not in SOAR anymore. We had SOAR a very long time. We don't use transaction codes anymore. They're actually doing debits and credits. They're not doing, so some of it was just learning, and some of it was stabilizing and realizing some of the things you thought you could do, you can't do, but it wasn't the system, it's because the system wasn't designed to do that. So I would say things are much better today than they were even yesterday.
I'm going to change the subject. How many vacancies do you have within the Office of Budget and Planning?
Two.
Out of how many? Out of how many positions?
Oh,
total?
47.
And how long have they been vacant? Not
Uh,
necessarily precisely, but for like recently or for 8 years?
no, they've been vacant about 3 months.
What is your office's telework policy?
Well, it's the OCFO's telework policy, which is, I think, as the CFO, or actually our Chief of Staff and Deputy CFO, Angel Jacobs, described at the OCFO's hearing, the maximum days that you can telework out of a pay period is 9. That's not necessarily happening throughout the OCFO. That's just a hybrid policy. In my office, most people come in at least 2 days a week on average. That has changed. There are times when if it's a snow storm and someone asks for an extra day or something, we make accommodations, but on average, they come in about 2 days a week.
And you said the maximum allowed for teleworking is 9 days per pay period?
That's the maximum, but that is not what, as our Deputy Chief of Staff and Deputy CFO Angel Jacobs said, that is not the average. That is the policy. But highly, and I think maybe she said it or our CFO Glenn said it, but that's not been my observation. But I don't really want to speak on behalf of the CFO. I'll just tell you, I'll repeat what he
Well,
said.
9 per pay period, there are 10 working days per pay period. So
No,
that would-
I'm sorry. What is it? There are 10 days per pay period,
Yeah.
right? So the hybrid policy allows for, depending on the circumstances, depending on the area, depending on what they do, it allows for 9 days out of that 10-day work, a 10-day pay period. That's the maximum. But that is not, as was stated in the CFO's hearing, that is not on average what's being done.
The
There are some
average-
people that have never teleworked at all in the
Yeah,
OCFO.
but so in your office, meaning Office of Budget and Planning, most people come in 2 days a week?
On
meaning
average.
That the average is about 6 days per pay period teleworking.
Yes.
You hesitated there, like it
Well, I had
took a
to do the
while
math
for
in
you.
my
to-
head.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Yeah, I had to
but
do
you're
the math.
But you're the budget guy. You're supposed to be able to do math quickly.
Yeah.
Okay, we get reports from the OCFO, we being the council, on contingency reserves. It's like a quarterly report. Do those come out of your office?
They come out of my office, yes.
Why does it take so long? Why do we get a report for July, the quarter ending June 30th? Why do we get that report in November?
I remember hearing that from you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we had some data issues. And here's what should have happened.
I don't think that was the only time it's happened.
It's on average, it doesn't happen like that. But we had some verification issues. Here's what should have happened. And I've already talked to my staff about it. What we should have done was contacted your office and said, listen, we're working on this report. We're having some issues. We may be late. We didn't do that. So you were left in the dark. You got the report late and you just thought we didn't, whatever you
Mr.
thought.
Kennedy, if I go back to my office and I go look up when we got all the reports, I'm betting that we get the report.
In the
on
last
average
year or two,
2 to 3 months after the quarter.
in the last year or two, that is very possible. I think if you go back prior to our new system, that is not the process. That's not the case. So
It was slower or quicker?
it was quicker. And so, and it's not a system issue, but again, there are some learning curves around some of the way the data comes out of the system. I'm not making excuses. It's my job to get them to you on time. But one of the things that we are going to do differently is when we know we're having a problem, and we don't anticipate that this year, we hope not, but if we do, we're going to notify you well in advance.
Well, I don't, not to be stupid, but I don't know what the problem could be because there aren't that many draws, or maybe 30 draws,
But
40, and
it's
you have
not
to
really
know
the
each one.
draws, it's verification. We have to go in and verify. So earlier I talked about transaction codes. That's how you would go in, you can identify something by a transaction code. We can't do that anymore. So we're doing the verification a little differently. Again, I don't want to get in technical. I don't want to make excuses. We should have let you know. We didn't. We'll do better.
Yeah, but don't you have somebody who handles contingency reserve requests?
Well, it's not so much the request, it's reporting. That's the issue.
And what are you reporting other than that, let's see, the executive requested a $10 million draw.
But I have to
toward-
verify it. I have to verify it in the system.
What are you verifying?
That what's in, what we said we put in, we actually put in. I do it 2 times. The first time when we go put it in, we verify it's there. And then before we send out reports, we do another verification just to make sure something didn't happen, to make sure so we'll do better.
I'm still confused. So
I
I
know.
believe the council receives, our budget director receives paperwork for every draw from the contingency reserves.
Yep.
Okay, so she could be taking those and putting them in a file folder. I don't know. But
Right.
let's say she puts them in a file folder.
Mhm.
You could go to her office tomorrow.
I
get the
have
File
those.
folder and write up a report that's a list of whatever's in that file folder.
I could, but that's not my process.
Whoa, okay, is this process over-engineered?
So let me say it a different way. We've taken a look at it. We're bean counters, and we like to count the beans twice. We've made adjustments. I don't anticipate this being a problem going forward. But what I saw this go around before we looked at the process was we did not give you the courtesy of a notification. That's what I think
Okay.
went wrong.
Well, okay, I don't want the courtesy of a notification. I want the report more.
You'll get the
quickly.
report. So
All right, I'm going to ask at the next
Okay.
hearing on March 26th, I'm going to ask when we're going to be getting these reports.
okay, fair enough.
Give me a second. I think I'll leave it there for the moment. Your budget hearing is March 26th,
Yes, sir.
so we will see you then. I don't think you have any homework from this one, other than to be prepared on March 26th about,
Diffs and contingency cash reports.
yes, there are,
That's-
there are other reports you prepare.
Yeah, but those reports, FSRs, that's the only other report we had some difficulty with. But other than that, no, we didn't have any difficulty.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're going to turn now to the District of Columbia Auditor, who I believe is participating virtually. I have one witness, David Maloff, who I believe is virtual. Mr. Maloff, if you're here, why don't you proceed?
Mr. Mendelson, Auditor and past Council Member Patterson, thank you for allowing me to testify today. I'm David Maloff. I'm a 41-year resident of DC and proud of it. I have testified before the council many times. Part of that time in my role as the past president of the Federation of Citizens Associations, at that time an umbrella group of about 24 civic, citizens, and community groups around the district. So I'm familiar with this process. And Ms. Patterson, you were a terrific council member, and I'm sure you're a great auditor. I'm here to make an appeal today that since you work for the council, that you, to fulfill your mission, that you conduct a non-audit review of the Department of Buildings, previously called the Department of Consumer and Regulatory Affairs. I think it's time. Mr. Mendelson, you've got about 40 people lined up tomorrow just for DOB, the Department of Buildings. And I looked at the list a few minutes ago. I only know one other person on that list. But last year for Oversight, last year for Budget, last year in October for Mr. Hanlon's confirmation hearing with Ms. Rogers, and for the Talbert Street debacle hearing on November 9th. All of the testimonies by public witnesses had to do with, when you really get through it all, public safety. The agency's mission is public safety. I just looked at Mr. Hanlon's testimony for tomorrow. It's very light. The word safety is only mentioned 3 times, and economic development comes second, not first. And in order for us to get off this treadmill of worry among residents, and for my wife and I, 17 months of abject disappointment with the agency, and in particular with the Office of Construction and Building Standards and the General Counsel's Office, I think the Mayor's Office of Legal Counsel needs to step in. There needs to be a positive audit with people seconded to help Mr. Hanlon. DMOI, Mr. Anderson, I think should vend in a person to help Ms. Patterson's group, and probably, again, the Mayor's Office of Legal Counsel. And if you can meet about 15 to 20 managers, mid-level managers confidentially, and give them some assurance of confidence, and then also go through the last 4 performance hearings I've talked about, the hearings, and the one you'll hear tomorrow, you can come up with a punch list of likely things that need to be fixed. This fixation on KPIs is backwards. And I believe very simply, you don't need to hire an expensive management consulting firm. It can be done within the district among colleagues to make the department better. I believe Mr. Hanlon can't admit how much help he needs, and he may need some FTEs. In the departments that I'm concerned about, the vacancy rate's about 22%. Now, I know construction might be down a little bit, but those are important jobs. They need to be fulfilled for safety. This is an opportune time to fix what for years and years and years has been a broken agency. So therefore, without taking a lot more time, I've got a methodology that I'm sure you can use. I'm sure Ms. Patterson knows better ways to get at the root. And you don't need to be experts yourself in all things construction to know what the management team itself will say needs to be fixed. Mr. Mendelson, we've got to get off of this treadmill. The movie Groundhog Day, it's February. I think Groundhog Day is happening tomorrow. And Mr. Hanlon's testimony is too light. And there needs to be a punch list. You need to have your 12 to 24 points that he fixed in the prior year presented to you tomorrow. And I don't think you're going to get it. So thank you for having me. And we can do this. This is not rocket science to fix DCRA, now DOB. Thank you.
So, Mr. Maloff, succinctly, what would the auditor look at?
Oh, well, each of the areas, again, I've focused on 2 here, but you've got last year and again this year, you're going to get inspections and mold and everything brought up tomorrow by people who are worried about the safety of their building.
No, I'm not asking a description. I'm saying succinctly, in one sentence,
Yes.
What is the auditor looking at?
Yeah, the auditor interviews mid-level management and tallies up all of the problems from past testimonies in the last 2 years and comes up with a checklist of things that need to be fixed. What needs to be fixed? There are myriad things I can bring up today, sir, just in these 2 departments. And I don't know that we need to go there, but I've got to check the list of at least 25 different things that need to be fixed. That's the focus. That's the purpose of I believe, a non-audit review. Ms. Patterson's mission statement is perfect online to assist the council and the government to do better.
All right, I wrote down to identify a checklist of what needs to be fixed.
Well, yes.
Okay, thank you.
And open-ended. You go in positively, confidentially a little bit, and with an open mind. What needs to happen here? And Mr. Hanlon, as an example, in November talked about he needs to fix a self-inspection. Self-inspection, that is the world's worst oxymoron. Red lights everywhere. There are major inspection protocols that are self-inspected, funded by and supervised by the person who wants to be inspected. These things need to be fixed. Conflicts of interest are many within the agency. Potentials for being influenced are many within the agency. It happens in any regulatory agency where an inspector has direct contact with the inspected. These are things that can be fixed, and it's very common in regulatory licensing to go and do a review. So I hope I'm not being too general with you here, but the list is well known what needs to be fixed.
Yes. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. You were the only non-government witness, so I'm going to turn now
Yes, sir.
to Kathy Patterson, who I believe is online. When you're ready.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. I'm Kathy Patterson, and I appreciate this opportunity to appear before the committee to talk about the performance of the Office of the DC Auditor during FY23 and in the initial months of FY24. And I'll cover these areas in my testimony: the committee's policy recommendations from last year, including the creation of the position of Deputy Auditor for Public Safety, our new set of key performance indicators, our remote work policy, and highlights of some of the work we have underway today. Last May, Chris Magnus joined ODCA as the district's inaugural Deputy Auditor for Public Safety, bringing some 40 years of law enforcement experience, including having served as Chief of Police in 3 very diverse U.S. communities: Fargo, North Dakota, Richmond, California, and Tucson, Arizona. He was one of a couple of exceptional finalists for the position, and we worked together with our colleagues at ODCA to build an oversight team. By early fall of this past year, we'd hired a supervisory auditor, another auditor, 2 investigators, and a data scientist to make up the public safety team. And that team is working on the following important projects. The first is the police staffing study that was previously requested by you, Mr. Chairman, and the former chair of the Committee on the Judiciary and Public Safety, Mr. Allen. And as you know, we've had some issues securing some of the information that we sought from sworn members of the MPD, but nevertheless, that report is due to us in a draft within a few weeks. The second project is an evaluation of the police department against a set of 100 metrics representing sound, accountable, just, and effective policing. The New York University Policing Project developed this set of metrics in collaboration with police leaders, criminal justice professionals, researchers with public safety expertise, and community members. Once that assessment is complete, MPD will be given a score that can help guide agency leadership, council members, and others looking to improve policing in our community. The third project is a review of any influence of white supremacist or other hate groups within MPD that was proposed by Councilmember Louis George and included in the same bill that called for the Public Safety Deputy Auditor. That one is also underway. In addition to these 3 projects, the public safety team is coordinating with our other teams, including a follow-up on the 2021 audit of the Office of Unified Communications 911 operations, ongoing work on the district's violence interrupter program, and a final case study of Metropolitan Police Department's use of lethal force underway by the Bromwich Group. The other policy recommendation from the Committee of the Whole last year was to continue reviewing legislative mandates and other demands on ODCA resources that may have less priority than other subjects before the Council. We have developed a strong working relationship with the Office of Advisory Neighborhood Commissions, and as part of that collaboration, may come up with a legislative proposal on potential changes in the way the ANC Security Fund is managed. We believe that ODCA's current role in that is similar to certain other administrative tasks that were transferred away from us in the past, and some of the responsibilities for the fund may be better handled elsewhere. We hope to have more information on that later this spring. I do have a summary of some of our reports issued in 2023. We issued the first of our 2 reports on Vision Zero, titled DDOT Made Progress in Engineering and Equity, but Gaps Remain. We released that as a press conference last year, and we have a second one underway. We also have, excuse me. Apologize, Mr. Chairman. We also released, we also hosted at the Wilson Building a panel discussion with Georgetown University to release a report on COVID-19 and behavioral health, with panelists that included the chair of the Health Committee at the Council, Councilmember Christina Henderson. On September 14th, 2023, we released our second report on implementation and impacts of the NEAR Act. We found that efforts to strengthen the Office of Police Complaints and certain offense reforms had their desired effect, but we found that the bill's measures to expand data collection, including police stop data, to support evidence-based policies have not moved forward effectively. I'd now like to move toward our key performance indicators. In my last two performance hearings, I've talked to you about the agency improving our performance indicators and actually coming up with a new set of key performance indicators. And a year from now, we will be able to report on these following indicators: timeliness of reports, the length of time it takes from our letter of engagement until a report is published; number of council and executive actions based on ODCA work. And this is an update to a prior KPI to reflect not just legislative actions, but also administrative actions and actions taken by independent organizations. Percentage of recommendations adopted by the auditee. This is a new measure to indicate receptivity to recommendations as they are made, and is an important indicator in terms of our communication and collaboration with auditees. And finally, percentage of recommendations implemented. This is a measure we've used previously and one that is used by most audit shops. One issue we continue to discuss is how long we should continue tracking recommendations that haven't been fully implemented. And we do require documentation to classify something as actually having been implemented. We have an ODCA working group, and it's also recommended that we track certain other activity measures to assist in our own decision-making. And some of these will include things like numbers of reports we issue, staff retention rate, website analytics, and of course, our triennial peer review rating. These would not necessarily be public-facing, but are things that we would be happy to share with the committee in our performance reporting. The performance metrics that I'm mentioning will take on even greater importance in monitoring and evaluating our recent decision to approve remaining a primarily remote workplace. The ODCA policy, to take effect formally on March 1, will require employees to work in person as follows: in the office for 2 monthly staff meetings, on site for field work at audited agencies as outlined in each audit's project plan, at in-person entrance and closeout meetings, for our biennial staff retreats, and as other required by our mission and by individual projects as they are developed. What this means is that all full-time employees will continue to contribute 80 hours per 2-week pay period. Work hours may be non-contiguous, but always in close consultation with supervisors and across project teams. We're modeling this policy in large measure on that of the Government Accountability Office, which signed a future work agreement recently with the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers, local number 1921. The GAO's minimum time in the office will be 4 days per month, and more, quote, if the duties of the position and mission need require it. Factors in this policy include the productivity of ODCA over the last 4 years since the COVID-19 pandemic began. We did a staff survey, and in responses to the survey in early December, our staff indicated their preference for limited in-office hours as follows. Of 26 respondents, 10 indicated they would prefer 0 days required per week. 15 said 1 to 3 days per week. The top reason for working remotely, people cited, was the time required to commute to the office. Other factors they cited included flexibility working remotely and costs involved in working downtown. One of the strongest arguments for a continuation of remote work, though, goes to the nature of the work itself. And this was put most clearly in one response that we received from one of our auditors, and I'd like to just read that. This individual wrote, ODCA's work is primarily heads down, quiet, alone time spent writing, reading, and doing analytics. I probably average 2 meetings per week. I have a comfortable routine. I get all of my assignments completed when I'm supposed to. So I don't see anything positive about waking up earlier and getting dressed to go sit in a cubicle all day. Clearly, some of my colleagues enjoy the office atmosphere, so it's a nice resource for them, but I don't understand what the benefit of mandating office time is for those of us who have established a nice routine over the last 3+ years of telework. And I would also say ODCA is an accountability organization. Our reports lean heavily, entirely on evidence. and there is very little hard evidence that supports spending a majority of a work week in the office. What evidence there is actually leans in the opposite direction. Stanford University economist Nicholas Bloom, who has studied remote work for 20 years, wrote in the New York Times in October that employees equate a mix of working from home to an 8% raise. And he suggests that post-pandemic work from home is stabilizing at about 1/3 of total workdays. And his conclusion is that, quote, remote work has been good for almost everyone. We should support this golden moment and lay the 5-day office work movement to rest, end of quote. And as you know, Mr. Chairman, we were in the process of securing new office space when the pandemic began. And one of the things that we are doing now is we've let the Department of General Services know that we can shrink our office space in a large measure because we are going to have less time in the office. And I do want to assure the committee that we will monitor our productivity and we will absolutely revisit the balance of remote versus in-office work if the evidence tells us to do so. Another thing I can share, in recent months, we've also bolstered the financial expertise on our staff in hiring as Deputy Assistant Auditor for Finance, Will Singer, an experienced district official who is helping us increase a focus on the broad and influential role of the Office of the Chief Financial Officer. It is our hope that this additional focus will assist the council in strengthening its own oversight of this important agency. In the FY24 approved budget, the OCFO and the agency fiscal officers embedded in other agencies who report to the CFO together account for $409 million and 1,686 full-time equivalent employees. In terms of the number of employees, that would be the district's 4th largest agency, behind only DC Public Schools, the Police Department, and the Fire Department. And these figures do underscore the OCFO's responsibility for sound management of the district's financial affairs. In terms of our current work today, we're managing 17 individual projects, 5 on contract and 12 by ODCA staff. And a few of those that will have reports coming out in the next few months include a comprehensive review of the Department of Employment Services Unemployment Compensation Benefits Division and the internal controls in place to approve, report, and control overtime. As I mentioned, we'll have another audit on the district's Vision Zero initiative focusing on enforcement with a look at the Department of Transportation, the Police Department, and the Department of Public Works. This includes automated traffic enforcement and the record and procedures for locating speed and red light cameras. Another will be a Council for Court Excellence study of services provided by the Child and Family Services Agency and the Department of Youth Rehabilitative Services to youth involved in both child welfare and juvenile justice systems, including data sharing and coordination and potential ways to improve support for this particularly vulnerable population. Finally, in terms of upcoming reports, the Bromwich Group will complete their 3rd and final report on officer-involved fatalities, looking at the 2020 death of Karen Hilton Brown, for which 2 former members of MPD were prosecuted and found guilty of a series of charges. As I noted a year ago, the Metropolitan Police Department implemented nearly all of the recommendations from our first 2 reports, including ensuring that investigations by Internal Affairs and its oversight by the Use of Force Review Board are comprehensive. We also noted that in November 2022, MPD followed up on its commitment to publish summaries of the UFRB reports, but as you well know, Mr. Chairman, MPD recently stopped publishing the summaries based on an arbitrator's decision, which the department chose not to appeal. The upcoming 3rd and final use of force report by the Bromwich Group will review whether there have been backsliding in other areas and the important progress the department had made to strengthen its internal reviews of use of force. And the provision that you all included in the first reading of the Secure DC Act to require the department to publish a portion of these reports, I think will be to the good and moves us back in the direction of transparency where the department had been moving previously. We also have projects underway looking at inclusionary zoning, looking at the top 10 vendors who receive the most money in the district's contract dollars, a research report on how our public schools are prepared and equipped to support students at risk of suicide, and audits of a couple of advisory neighborhood commissions with reviews that were recommended by the community. And that concludes my statement, Mr. Chairman. I'm happy to respond to questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Patterson. How often does your office have staff meetings?
We have a monthly staff meeting. Well, we have a monthly staff meeting that includes everyone on staff. Our teams tend to have team meetings pretty often, sometimes a couple times a week.
Because when you started talking about the remote policy, remote work policy, I thought I heard you say in the office for 2 monthly staff meetings, but the statement says 1, or it doesn't say any.
Yeah, I'm sorry. One is a monthly staff meeting where we go over all kinds of issues, talk about our work and talk about various things. The second monthly staff meeting is not really a staff meeting, but a brown bag where we have speakers come in. Sometimes that qualifies as training and sometimes not, but it's so it would essentially be one of these meetings each pay period that folks would be in the office those days.
So it's not technically a staff meeting, but it is twice a month.
Right.
And your statement mentioned the idea of transferring management of the ANC Security Fund to the ANC office or the Office of the Chief Financial Officer. Can you discuss this in more detail? What is the issue and why you think it's appropriate somewhere else?
What I can say most confidently is that it's not appropriate at ODCA, and for some of the same reasons as some of the other administrative functions were transferred away from the Office of the DC Auditor, because under GAGAS, under Generally Accepted Government Auditing Standards, a general rule is you don't help to operate something that you also audit. And because we have been managing the security fund, working with individual ANCs to get their paperwork in and everything every year, this becomes something that can be seen as a conflict of interest to do the administrative work. But where we are in this right now is not being prepared to come to you with a recommendation just yet, because we want to be talking with the Office of the Advisory Neighborhood Commission. So we have a meeting scheduled sometime in the next several weeks, I think, to talk about what we might jointly want to recommend to the council. And another issue, quite candidly, is whether at this day and time, whether the security fund is actually needed. So that's another part of the conversation. But I wanted to flag it as something that we will likely come to you with a recommendation at some point in the near future.
Do you know offhand or remember offhand how much money is in the security fund?
Each ANC that participates is required to, I believe it's $50 a year, something like that. I think we just increased the figure in the last year, but I will check on that and be able to
Yeah,
get
but there are
back.
40 ANCs and 40 times 50 is $200, 2,000 or 20,000. And the fund has been around for 50 years, almost 50 years, so 50 times 2,000 would be $100,000. You don't know offhand how much money's in the fund.
No, but I can certainly get that for you. It's in the fund in order to be able to support ANCs and assure that if there's funds stolen or something like that, that in some way, shape, or form they can be made whole. Let's see, at the end of fiscal 23, it was 77,000 in the security fund.
Okay. Give me just a second. Another question on the teleworking. Have you looked at what other auditor offices are doing You mentioned GAO, but what about like, I'm assuming there's a position somewhat like yours in the Commonwealth of Virginia, in Arlington County, in Montgomery County. Have you looked at those?
I have not done a survey of other offices, but I can tell you that I participated in a discussion probably 9 or 10 months ago. It was a meeting of the National State Auditors Association where there was a principals only meeting. And so it was me and my peers from around the country. So there were probably 30, 35 state auditors around a table. And this is something that we did discuss. There were one or two other offices that were sort of headed in the direction that we have gone in of very liberal remote work policies. And I would say, again, just from measuring around the table, a majority were moving back toward more mandatory time in the office, 3 to 5 days a week in the office. So I would say we were probably at that time, we were certainly in the minority, but not alone. I think one of the points I heard the chief financial officer make in his hearing on these questions a couple of weeks ago. One of the points I think he made that I think is also true for us is that we are in a competitive work environment and retaining, and I feel like we have an exceptionally good staff. I want to keep them all. And having a very flexible remote work policy is a huge advantage as an employer to retain and also potentially recruit good staff.
Have you instituted any metrics to monitor how the new policy will affect productivity or other measures?
Nothing other than the list of KPIs that I mentioned, where we keep track of how long each project takes from start to finish. We keep track of, what the result is in terms of the recommendations. So we are following up on that. And because we have pretty close supervision of our audit teams, I think there is a pretty good understanding of who is doing what kind of work. I think we are a high-performing workplace. One of the other ways in which I feel comfortable saying that is we have on occasion hired individuals from other workplaces in the district government. And some of the very informal commentary that that I've heard from new colleagues has been how hard we all work at the Office of the DC Auditor. And that's a very, very unscientific piece of evidence, but it is something that is of interest to me in terms of sort of new staff sense of expectations at ODCA.
Your testimony describes your efforts to increase oversight of the Office of the Chief Financial Officer. Some of your management recommendations have been at odds with OCFO's opinion, including with regard to your recent management alert with respect to the Housing Authority and the ACFR. To what extent have you raised these concerns directly with the OCFO before sending out a management alert?
We did not previously raise the issue of the characterization of the DC Housing Authority, apart from raising it at the end of August in one of the monthly and then weekly meetings of the ACFR Planning Committee that's hosted by the Inspector General. I raised that issue then, and that's when I found out that they actually had issued an opinion on that issue and then got the opinions and kept looking at it. So in that context, we certainly gave them a heads up that this was something that was of concern that we were looking at. But more broadly, with regard to the CFO, prior to Mr. Lee's arrival and confirmation hearing, we completed a report that pulled together a lot of findings from ODCA reports issued over the last 7 or 8 years in order to sort of put in one place concerns we had raised about the agency reflected in other reports. For example, the first major school modernization report that was done on that was completed on my watch, had some CFO findings. It was primarily aimed at the Department of General Services, but it had CFO findings as well. So from that one forward, we put together some of the things that we wanted to share, both with the committee with oversight for the CFO, but also with the new CFO. So a whole series of issues have been shared with that office, as I say, starting prior to Mr. Lee's arrival.
But that latter did not include the housing authority concern.
That report did not, no. No, we first flagged that issue, as I say, at the end of August. And then before we issued the management alert, obviously gave it to the CFO to review and comment on, which is what we do with everything we put out.
You mentioned current audit work underway on the Department of Employment Services Unemployment Compensation Division and the internal controls in place to approve, report, and control overtime. So are you looking at the division as a whole in addition to their overtime policies? Or are you just looking at the overtime side of things?
We looked at the way in which overtime was managed during the pandemic. So this is a look at a division within that agency at a very high stress point in time. I even said to them, it's sort of like doing a stress test. So we were looking at the controls of approvals and so forth, but we also decided it would be valuable to look at the sort of culture of the workplace. So we also did an employee survey and employee interviews looking at sort of attitudes towards work. So the report is going to have sort of those two sections, looking at the internal controls and how they did in managing the overtime, but also what employee attitudes have been toward their place of work. So it'll cover both those topics.
Okay. In your written statement, you have a section on page 3 called Repeal of ODCA Mandates. I got all excited because we do this every couple of years.
Right.
And there are about 4 or 5 or 6, and then there's a bill introduced. And
Mr. Chairman, you have been so successful in repealing some of those we have shared with you that our list is really, really short.
your list is one thing which we already talked about.
Right. But every once in a while, new ones crop up, so we'll have to keep vigilant.
Well, you may not get another chance. Okay. In your statement, you also mentioned that you are looking at Child and Family Services Agency. Now, what you say is you're looking at CFSA and its relationship with DYRS, Department of Youth Rehabilitative Services, with regard to data sharing, maybe a little bit more.
Yeah, that's a report that the Council for Court Excellence is doing and on contract with us. And they have been looking at services provided to crossover youth. And crossover youth are young people who are involved in both the child welfare system and the juvenile justice system. So they've been touched by both agencies and looking at what kinds of services they receive. One of the big issues there is data sharing. And that's a report that we expect to get in draft within the next week or two. But that's the topic and that's what they've been looking at. We hope there will be recommendations on how to improve services, but also as a part of that, there may be recommendations in terms of how to improve data sharing.
Yeah, this comes up in the context of other agencies with juvenile data, actually other data as well. And no, mostly juvenile data. And what I've realized, I had this conversation recently with Councilmember Pinto because of the secure DC bill, is that oftentimes agency will not share data because they say the law won't let them, but actually it's because they don't want to share the data because the law would let them. Most recently, this, I think, involved sharing information, I believe, from CFSA to schools regarding students, and CFSA was saying they couldn't share the data, but actually the law says that they can share data when it's in the interest of the child's education. Of course, any data sharing is confidential, but that's not the point. It's that the agency these agencies are quick to say they won't share when in fact they're allowed to. They just choose not to. But the reason why I asked about this study is because last December, I had a hearing, the committee had a hearing on truancy. And you may remember that over the last decade, the council's changed the law so that when a child is accumulating absences, particularly unexcused absences, at some point there's a referral to CFSA if the child is under 13. The intent is to have a set of expert eyes look at the child and the home situation and see if there's something that can be addressed to ensure that the child attends school. And as far as I can tell, and I remember from the hearing, everybody agrees that intervention, when children are racking up missed days, is the best approach. But CFSA doesn't want to do this. They view their mission very narrowly as focusing on abuse and neglect, and therefore investigations, full-blown investigations, and a very unpleasant task of possibly removing a child from the home. But when one reads the law, the CFSA's mission is broader than that. It includes working with parents to help them with parenting. It's as if CFSA is deliberately choosing the more stigmatized role. And I put it that way because there is stigma around CFSA that families or parents resist CFSA because they see CFSA as a punitive or negative agency. And it doesn't have to be that way. So I was just wondering whether this report will touch on that at all. It sounds like it won't.
Again, I have not read the draft report, so I don't know how much, I don't know the extent to which it does touch upon that, but what you're describing sounds like the sort of the underpinnings of why you put together the truancy task force so many years ago, because that put CFSA at a table with schools to talk about respective roles and so forth. And if the agencies have moved away from that I'm sorry to hear that. I did not see that hearing, so I did not see that exchange.
Yeah. Well, if you're interested and you have spare time, it was a hearing that the Committee of the Whole had last December, I believe it was early December, on truancy or attendance. And if you have any thoughts about that, you get back to me on that.
Thank you.
Just a second. I have one last question. In your testimony, one of the first things you talked about was the first project is the police staffing study. And you had this line, as you know, we've had some issues securing some of the information we have sought from sworn members of the Metropolitan Police Department. Can you elaborate?
Sure. We wanted to interview officers. And we thought the best way to go about doing that would be to work with the district commanders. And so raised with the then very new chief of police, we wanted her assistance in contacting all the district commanders so that they could help us interact with individual officers. That did not happen because Chief Smith came to believe and shared with me that she believed for her to do that would be a violation of the collective bargaining agreement with the Fraternal Order of Police.
Do you agree?
No, no, it's a ridiculous assumption, but it has a basis in a circumstance that goes back to when Chief Ramsey was the chief of police. And apparently, and I'm not very familiar with this, but apparently there was a survey conducted, and apparently that survey did get into some issues that could have more legitimately been considered part of the collective bargaining agreement. And so ever since this occurred, there's been this view in the higher levels of authority at the Metropolitan Police Department that nobody can talk to individual officers. But we are trying to work around that, and our Deputy Auditor for Public Safety and his team have had conversations with the head of the police union. And we believe that there are finally going to be some conversations with individual officers put together by the union itself. And they may or may not take place before we have a draft report, but we may have some kind of an appendix to the report reflecting what these interviews tell us if we learn something from these interviews. So I decided not to pursue this issue from the standpoint of exerting our subpoena authority. We decided to try to work more cooperatively with the powers that be and seek to get individual interviews another way. And so we continue to be hopeful that that will in fact happen.
So the chief essentially said that this was a union issue, so
It
you
was an
went to the
unfair,
union.
it would be an unfair labor practice for her to facilitate interviews with individual officers.
So you would have to go to the union. So you went to the union.
Right.
And am I hearing that the union has been wholly cooperative, or that initially they were resistant? They're cooperative now, they were slow to become cooperative, or they're still balking? How would you characterize the union?
Conversations are proceeding. We are in conversation. I'm not in conversation. The deputy auditor, Mr. Magnus, is in conversation with the leader of the police union, and I believe there are going to be some conversations with officers.
When did
with that team.
when did all this start? When did you reach out to the chief?
I believe my conversations with the chief were in November. But I can certainly get that date and let you know.
Not later than November.
No, could have been
Right,
earlier.
so 3 months ago.
Yes.
November would be 3 months ago, maybe a little longer. So I assume that shortly after that, you reached out to the union.
It was prior to the confirmation, actually.
Prior to the chief's confirmation.
Right.
Yeah, I think that was October. Yeah, I think the chief was confirmed in October or November. It's the first Tuesday in November. So the union has finally chosen to facilitate some interviews, but those interviews may not take place until after the report is done.
No, I believe that will be before we issue a report. I'm just saying that this is a contract study being done by a contract firm. The interviews will likely be done by our own team. So it'll be a matter of sort of putting those pieces together.
Yeah, the confirmation was November 7th. So that's 4 months ago that you
Thank you.
started this. So let me just so I understand. What you want to do, this is a staffing study, and what you want to do is, among other things, talk to some police officers and ask questions like, do you think there are enough police officers? Do you think there are too many police officers? Would you like to have more colleagues on duty with you? Questions like that, right?
Right.
A sense from the working man and working woman, whether they're overstaffed or understaffed, and I'm reasonably certain they would say they were understaffed.
Right.
And that's what you wanted to find out from first-person interviews.
Yes.
And you've gotten all of this very warm, welcoming cooperation, or lack thereof. Give me just a second. I have no further questions for you at this time.
Would you
You're,
like me to comment on one of the previous witnesses' comments?
Yes.
I think what sounded like what he was describing was something that we have sometimes done as a legislative compliance audit, where there's a major piece of legislation that's been enacted. That's what we do to the NEAR Act. And we go back and look at how effectively it has been implemented. If that were an approach that we would take with the Department of Buildings, it might need to wait a little while because it's been 2 years since they were stood up, or just a year? Anyway, I just
October
wanted to mention
2022.
that the timing would be important. But I also heard and understand that there is a sense of urgency here. So it may not be a legislative compliance audit so much as addressing what the major what the major issues are right now. But I also suspect that given the extent of the work that you and your staff have done on this and that very excellent report that you issued about a month ago, you may be able to draft up that prospectus yourself, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. I have no other questions for you at this time. I believe your budget hearing is scheduled for March 26th,
Thank you.
so we'll see you then.
Okay, thank you, Mr.
Thank-
Chairman.
Thank you very much. I will turn now to the Statehood Commission, and we have one public witness. Jermaine, who's not here. Jermaine Jones is not here. So I'll turn to the delegation. Paul Strauss, who's here in person, Michael Brown, who's online, and Oye Awolea.
Let me apologize in advance, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to have a hard stop in about 15 minutes or so. I've been here since 2:30, and I cleared my schedule until the
You know, I can
afternoon.
barely hear you.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman. I said, let me apologize in advance. I'm going to have a hard stop at in about 15 minutes. I was happy to be here since 2:30, and I cleared the bulk of my calendar
Yeah.
for this.
I know you've been here and I appreciate that. We're going to go through this again on March 26th, and you will probably be last on the list. So that hearing starts at 9 o'clock. So probably would not get to you until be that long. Well, certainly not before 11 and maybe 12. I mean, the agencies before you are the council, where we usually have one witness, Council of Governments, where we usually have no witnesses, Office of Budget and Planning. It's like today, there'll be two witnesses, the auditor, maybe a witness, and then you all. So, and that hearing's supposed to start at 9.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think a copy of our prepared statement has been
Yes.
submitted. And of course, as you are the commission's co-chair, and so I appear today on behalf of the commission pursuant to a section of the bylaws dealing with the absence of the co-chairs. I'll just summarize it so that we could address any questions you may have and yield to any statements my colleagues make. We certainly thank you for your leadership. Our budgeted stated initiatives focus on a variety of efforts. Of course, we directly engage with the U.S. Congress. We engage in outreach to targeted states. I testified recently at the Committee on Federal and Foreign Regional Affairs with the government of Guam. We coordinate closely with the Mayor's Office of Federal and Regional Affairs. as well. Our efforts in targeted states include visits to legislatures in New Mexico, Nevada, Arizona, and other states. And right now, I'm sure he'll tell you all about it. My colleague, Senator Brown, is in the great state of Nebraska, where he testified at a hearing on a DC statehood resolution. And so I look forward to hearing about his progress. We had the opportunity to participate in some international organizational efforts, including DC's continued participation in the UNPO. I was privileged to be a guest at 2 international human rights law conferences, one organized by the World League on Freedom and Democracy, entitled the Forum on Freedom and Democracy Towards Peace, another that was held with parliamentarians from around the world at the Japanese Diet, that dealt with human rights violations, focusing on the Uyghur community, but it was an important opportunity to explain the importance of DC statehood in the context of international law as well. We also do individual outreaches. Senator Brown can talk about his radio show. The commission has funded a new initiative this year in the budget where Representative Overlay was supercar parade and rally. I'm sure he can talk about that. And of course, the commission met, and one of its primary responsibilities is to exercise oversight and approve the fiscal year 2024 spending plan that was done at the last commission meeting. And so we appreciate the work of the commission. We think it's important to continue to provide coordinated leadership for the statehood effort. We appreciate the leadership of you, the mayor, in providing that. And we will be expanding our efforts at national conventions as well. And so some additional activities are always budgeted and were approved by the commission for the national party conventions and outreach activities associated with those. Thank you.
You're very soft-spoken today.
I can try and move the mic as close as I can, if that's a little better, and lean forward.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I did barely hear you.
All right.
So that concludes your statement.
That concludes my statement.
Let me ask Senator Brown if he has anything. And he's not being responsive. Representative Ovalewa?
Yes, thank you so much, Chairman, and thank you, Committee of the Whole, for allowing me to be here. I'll just read my testimony. I believe I emailed it to you,
Yeah,
but later on, so.
Hey, can you guys hear me?
Okay, he's here.
I can now. I can't see you, but I can hear you, Senator Brown.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Chairman Mendelson, but I'm in Nebraska testifying, so I'm on my cell phone. And being an old guy and not particularly technology savvy, I'm having a few problems. So I'm sorry that you can't see me. I assure you I'm as handsome as you remember. But if I have time, I'd like to testify.
Can you go right now?
Yeah, right now.
Please.
So I want to thank you for summoning me to testify here today as part of your oversight authority, ostensibly to assess my performance to validate the salary the city does not pay me. Let me assure you, you're still getting your money's worth. I come to you today remotely from Nebraska, where I just testified before the state legislature advocating for a resolution of DC statehood. It went very, very well. My podcast, Shadow Politics, continues to gain listeners. In its 11th year, I've interviewed congressmen, senators, governors, astronauts, celebrities, and my show is now the most popular social media program in the statehood movement. My guest this week is Chief Pam Smith of MPD. It is broadcast on several platforms, including being heard locally 3 times a week on WEAC Radio. I recently filed an amicus brief in a lawsuit brought by DC residents against the Secretary of Commerce for her failure to fulfill her constitutional responsibility to report the population of the district for purposes of allocation in Congress. A decision is now pending before a three-judge panel in federal court in the District of Columbia. The Justice Department moved to have the suit thrown out, but the court has decided not to do that. We're not sure that they're going to hear it, but they're not going to throw it out. In addition, I've met recently with 3 Senate offices and have met in person with both senators from Maine, securing a commitment from independent Senator Angus King in support of DC statehood. After meeting with Republican Senator Susan Collins, however, she remains on the fence. Since my last performance hearing, I've had 2 additional opinion pieces published in the Washington Post, bringing the total of my statehood opinion pieces to more than 25 pieces that I've had published in local publications. My public interest group, the one I started called the Statehood No Other Way Foundation, has held another successful event at Arena Stage, and we are currently planning another event for the fall. I continue to appear, of course, at public events, and I am busy developing a plan for our participation in the Democratic National Committee convention, in Chicago. Since this is my last performance hearing, I feel incumbent upon me to talk about what has been the major impediment to my performance over my last 18 years. Simply put, it has been the DC Council. Because of the council, there is no salary for my job, making it, along with my 2 colleagues, the only citywide elected position with no salary. This relegated me to the position of volunteer rather than senator. It is also it is also the only instance in American history under the Tennessee Plan where we have been removed from the Constitution. The council additionally adds insult to injury by calling me a shadow senator instead of using my official title of United States Senator. Our delegation is the only citywide elected offices not allowed to raise matching funds. We are like I said, we're the only senators removed from the Tennessee Plan in 228 years. We have been formed into an agency, even though we have 3 separate offices. I'm sorry, I'm trying to read this. We've received more than $340,000 from the taxpayers, which have been contributed to our work, but has been withheld from an apparatus created by you, Chairman Mendelson, called the Statehood Commission, which is chaired by you and the mayor. As you know, the first 8 years I served, there was no funding. Consequently, everything I did, I paid for out of my own pocket. I've spent more of my own personal funds in the last 18 years than the total that I've received from the DC government. Even though the money is there, it looks like I'm not going to break even, which is disgraceful. And to add insult to injury, although this money does not come personally to me, you just sent me a 1099 expecting me to pay taxes on money I never received. Most recently and most profoundly, however, the council sent an ill-conceived crime bill to Congress for approval that resulted in alienating 44 Democrats and the President of the United States. This has done irreparable damage to the statehood movement, and for this reason, I have decided not to run for re-election, leaving my office to someone younger and perhaps more able to stay the course. It has been an honor to represent the people of the District of Columbia, and it is unfortunate that my experience has been one where the DC City Council has consistently stood in the way of my progress. When I first entered politics 45 years ago, my boss used to say, "Michael, lead, follow, or get the hell out of the way." I say this to you now, Mr. Chairman, because although I believe statehood is inevitable, until the council gets on board, it is not going to happen. I no longer have a vested interest in any of this as I leave my elected position, but I implore you, pay the next person who takes on this responsibility, support them with appropriate staff and funding, and respect the fact that the same people that elected you elected them. It's time for you the mayor, and the council to do more than talk about statehood. It's time to work together to make it happen and for you to remember who was elected to get the job done. Thank you. I'll take any questions you have.
Thank you, Senator. I may have a question after we hear from the representative. Mr. Obolewa?
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to stay on the phone with you till the bitter end.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon again. My name is Dr. Oye Owolewa. I'm a pharmacist, former ANC, and current U.S. Representative of Washington, D.C. Since my tenure began in 2021, I've dedicated myself to this role, which centers on fighting for D.C. statehood. My unique background of being an elected healthcare worker, being a child of African immigrants, among others, have helped increase the awareness for D.C. statehood outside the district. In my first term, I've helped introduce a historic D.C. statehood resolution in West Virginia. This action, especially in deeply conservative states, raises the attention in all corners of America and practically reaches places that others can't reach. This term, I'm working to do the same in Texas. I've proud to announce I've had conversations with locally elected officials, including Grand Prairie Council member Junior Azanu and State Representative, former Minority Chair Chris Turner. My goal is to have DC statehood resolutions introduced in the next Texas legislative session. Here in DC, we're still doing our supercar rally for DC statehood, with the most recent one being last July 4th. It was well received and continues to engage people. Now let's talk impact. Let's talk about what I'm doing beyond and how I've been able to do so. As I mentioned before becoming representative, I was an ANC. While being representative, I'm also a licensed pharmacist. It impacts how I think and impacts how I serve. And I base my work on grassroots, evidence-based solutions to today's issues. Today, DC's #1 issue is public safety. Our legislature shows that, our conversations prove that, our local economy reflects that. Rather than staying on the sidelines or remaining in the shadows, I stepped up and got involved. My very first foray into community service was volunteering in elementary schools, getting boys and girls interested in pursuing careers in STEM. Since becoming rep, I've expanded my efforts into high schools, bringing other professions into the room, as well as talking about DC statehood. This isn't just education, it's also public safety. Studies suggest that every additional year of college decreases one's risk of committing violent crime by 10%. For those who've gone the wrong route, made mistakes, getting a record, and now found barriers to reentry, we've gotten involved in that too. Our expunction clinics are teaching folks about record sealing processes, onboarding them with pro bono lawyers, and providing job placement. All this in the name of improving public safety. Studies show that this also reduced crime by as much as 10%. So not only are we working in evidence-based action, we're also reviving the expungement conversation. I've recently seen legislative amendments addressing expungements. My council member just hosted expungement Zoom, and I'm proud that our work has impacted the community as well as things that's going on in this building. Ultimately, I'm proud of the work that's being done. It's impossible for me to go over the entire year in a few minutes, and I'm proud of the work that I've been able to do despite institutional barriers. Now, skipping ahead. All that aside, I'm continuing to work hard to elevate the impact and visibility of this role. The pillars of this office, fighting for DC statehood, improving public safety and health, economic development, and youth empowerment has afforded me the opportunity to impact thousands of lives here in DC. I look forward to the continued partnerships with the people in this room and beyond to make the greatest impact. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, each of you, for your statements. Senator Brown, I don't have a copy of your statement. Would you be willing to provide that?
Absolutely. I'm sorry that it hasn't been sent to you. I'll send you a copy. I wasn't sure whether I would be there or not, to be honest with you, Chairman Mendelson, because the thing to testify in Nebraska only came up on Thursday of last week. So I was kind of rushed out of town to get here to do this.
Senator, you mentioned when you were testifying, this is to Senator Brown, when you were testifying, you said something about having to reflect the revenue from the tax checkoff on a 1099. I hope I misunderstood you.
No, the $7,000 you gave me out of the $300,000 that was there, you've now sent me a 1099 expecting me to pay taxes on the $7,000. Now I've gotten in touch with the people in the accounting department, the office of the chief financial officer. They've yet to get back to me. I assume that I will have to fight this out with the IRS because you've informed the IRS, but I do not intend to pay taxes on money I've never received.
And nor should you. Senator Strauss?
We understand, I understand from our OFRM people that that was an error. I did not get one for the statehood fund, but I'm told that this is a problem that was related to the transition to diffs. I guess one advantage of being here is I learned a lot about diffs from Mr. Kennedy's testimony, and so I know that I'm told that that is going to be corrected, but it is for certain things, we have been treated as quote unquote suppliers. And there is a process that is being worked through. And so I am crediting the representations of our OFRM team that that is an error that will be corrected.
So
But let
you
me
have-
just add, after 30 years, we still have these problems every time we deal with the DC government because we're not part of the team. We've never been made part of the team. We have no employee. We have no numbers. Every time we want to get something out of the IT department or any place else, we have to jump through hoops because they don't recognize our office. They don't know who we are. I mean, it's crazy. We ought to be part of this government. We were elected, Chairman Mendelson.
Well, there happens to be an account in the budget for the statehood commission, so.
That's
We're
not our
being
office.
Nobody's being 1099 for funds that were directly allocated for the commission. There is a process where occasionally pursuant to the statute, funds are transferred from the commission to individual accounts. The statehood funds for Senator Brown's, apparently he was 1099 for that. There are occasional reimbursements for expenses that may be advanced as well. And sometimes 1099s are issued for those. May have been issued in error, and so we are inquiring. We're told it's an error. We believe it's an error.
And you, Senator Strauss, have personally been in touch with OFRM.
Yes,
And so you've had personal discussions with the Office of the Chief Financial Officer,
yes,
and they've indicated to you that they agree it's an error and they're fixing it.
yes.
He's getting different information than I'm getting, Chairman Mendelson. That's not what they've told me.
What they tell you, Senator Brown?
The Office of the Chief Financial Officer passed it on to somebody who has yet to return a phone call. Said that it wasn't his problem, basically. That's not what he does. And he passed it on to somebody else. And by the way, that gentleman, Paul Blake, is very, very helpful to us. He's a very good guy. But he's passed it on, and nobody from the other office has bothered to respond to my several phone calls.
Senator Strauss.
And I mean, it's only $7,000. I ran my own business for 25 years, Chairman Mendelson. I will straighten it out with the IRS, but it just adds insult to a lot of injury.
Yeah, no, I got that. Senator Strauss, did you get a 1099?
I did not. The fund was not 1099. There was a 1099 that I got for the reimbursement of an expense that we think was improper. And so
You received a 1099.
I received a 1099, not for the fund transfer, but for a travel-related expense that was deemed reimbursable. That was.
I understand.
So both. I don't think either one of those was appropriate. We're working.
Either one meaning yours or Senator
or
Brown.
Senator Brown's.
Yes. What about the representative? Did you get a 1099?
I haven't received one yet, but I'll look again.
Don't say yet. You don't want to receive one at all.
Right.
Okay. Well, if the OCFO is not responsive, will you please contact our office and we'll. see if we can help. Um, Over the past several years, I've always asked a question of the commission and of the two senators and representative, what initiatives are each of you working on to advance statehood? And the answers in the past have been TV commercials, radio show, funding international organizations, and others. What new strategies have you employed since last year?
I told you, Senator, I told you, Chairman, I'm involved in a lawsuit against the Secretary of Commerce. I'm testifying before state legislatures. I have a nonprofit. That I've started and which is doing okay these days. We've raised about $10,000, and I've been published in the Washington Post twice since the last time we met. So that's what I'm doing.
Senator Strauss, our representative Olawea.
Yes, as I mentioned during my testimony, getting into states that are deeply conservative that I've never seemed to take a stance on DC state has been my focus. Going into Texas, which has never produced or even introduced a DC statehood resolution, has been something I've been focusing on. Unfortunately, their legislative window is a little bit more narrow than other areas. Their state legislature only operates 5 months out of a 2-year span. So the next opportunity for us to introduce a DC statehood resolution would be in year 2025, and that's something that I've been paying attention to.
Senator Strauss.
I think I don't want to leave people with the impression that we're doing the same old thing, because we engage on the Hill, we engage across the country, we engage internationally, and there's always new strategies involved in those efforts, as well as the direct media outreach. And so using all these new technologies, et cetera. Certainly in terms of new initiatives that were funded officially by the commission, the representatives, Supercar Rally is new in the budget this year. And of course, the convention services, the convention outreach, where we expect to make a large impact at the national conventions, will involve new strategies, new outreach as well. I think you've also, we've seen some closer coordination between our fellow territories, which is the dramatic interest in the territory of Guam that is attempting to explore its status issue. The Commonwealth of Puerto Rico has elected a shadow congressional delegation mirroring our model as well, and we're working closely with them. So we're certainly always coming up with new ideas, but to say that outreaching with states, outreaching directly with Congress, outreaching with the international community is the same old thing, I'd hate for people to be left with the impression that that is stale, or that we're not innovating.
Chairman Mendelson, not to put too fine a point on it, but you've just heard Senator Strauss and Representative Olawale tell you that they're a lawyer and a pharmacist. And the reason they do this is because you don't pay us. Nobody can afford to do this full time. I am a millionaire. I was able to do it full time. We need to do this job full time. We need to compensate people for doing the job like everybody else has. I'm here in Nebraska being treated like a senator, introduced on the floor of the Senate, allowed to testify before for a committee today for a lengthy amount of time. The only place that I am not treated like a United States senator is in the District of Columbia.
Thank you. So I've asked this question in the past as well, which is, so do you have a copy of a plan for coordinating the work between you, building on work done last year and the year before, coordinating with other organizations like DC Vote? Do you have such a plan?
Are you asking me? Because
Asking
my
any-
plan, because we don't have money for a plan, and DC Vote doesn't work with our delegation. They work for the mayor.
Senator Strauss?
I've always enjoyed a very cooperative and positive relationship with the people at DC Vote, and we continue to work closely with them. We do have I believe the commission structure provides the plan through our meeting, and we certainly have a financial plan, we have strategic plans, we have strategic partners. We are just one fraction of the district's funded statehood effort. We work closely with the senior advisor and her team. We work closely with the Office of the Secretary, who administers grants to organizations. And so I would say that the financial spending plan, which the commission approves, is the blueprint of a written plan, and that the cooperation between the partners funded through the Office of the Secretary, and well as the initiatives funded through the Office of the Senior Advisor, where a significantly larger portion of statehood funding constitutes a plan. And that is, I'm sure, one of the reasons why you propose the commission as a model to bring these diverse groups together with a unified structure.
Look, Chairman Mendelson, this is a dying declaration for me. I have no vested interest in this anymore. I'm not going to run for re-election. But what my colleague is telling you doesn't exist. It doesn't exist for me. DC Vote won't work with me. The mayor's office won't work with me. There is no plan. And $225,000 a year to fund 3 offices makes us the lowest funded agency in the DC government by far. There is no plan. There is no way to move forward because we don't have the money to do this. Other territories have spent literally tens of millions of dollars to get this done, not $200,000.
It's a bit tough question to answer. We all have separate lives and we all have separate strengths. We've had conversations, quite frank, about ways to work together, and I tried my best to live up to that expectation, and I continue to do so. So it's a work in progress.
Thank you. One last question. Senator Strauss, you said that the budget for FY24 was adopted last summer. And that may be correct, but I thought it was the FY23 budget that was adopted last summer. Are you sure it was FY24?
Yes.
Well, that's an answer. Okay.
I'll make, I took a copy with me and I'll leave it with Mr. Cash. But,
Okay. I don't have any other questions for you all. Thank you for your work. As I said, we'll see you on the 26th when we know the budget. And I gave you a sense of what that hearing looks like. We'll know the number of witnesses the day before, so you can check. I appreciate that you've been here all day. I recognize that that's also been your time. And so
I wasn't complaining. I was just in case I needed to leave, I wanted to let you know in advance so that any questions you felt needed to be directed to me, you could
Yes.
ask. So public service is also a public trust. And when you have public funds, accountability is an important part of the process. And I think that's important. And so it's one of the reasons why I was here personally today. And we appreciate the opportunity, one, to showcase our work and to highlight what we do and to answer questions that you or any member of the legislative body wants to ask.
thank you. That's going to conclude this hearing. The committee meets again tomorrow, or has a hearing again tomorrow, where we will hear testimony regarding the performance of the Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority, Office of Zoning, Office of Planning, and Department of Buildings. And that hearing starts at 9:30 in the morning. Again, thank you to all the witnesses, and the time is not 5:27 p.m. and this hearing